Warning, this podcast contains scenes of explicit nonsense and lore.
Previously on the Resident Evil podcast.
Back in my day, the PC came on the disc!
Oh, you know, he's got a hard-on for the 2 minutes. Jesus.
What's a Resident Evil game without a chains?
Would it be easy to say you smell something strange?
I do smell something very strange.
The way I am with the Resident Evil 3 remake is that I just simply don't care about it. And I actually mean that as a positive. That should they ever marry, then she will actually become Jill Sandwich.
Oh, no.
Resident Evil Podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 58 of the now rebranded Resident Evil Podcast. We may have changed our name, but we have not changed our identity and passion for the Resident Evil series. I'm Nick, better known as Neptune. Let's see who's joining us today. He's the Caped Crusader of the Resident Evil world, it's Batman.
Evening.
He's streaming and playing Resident Evil 6, so we don't have to, it stars Tyrant.
Hello.
He's a veteran Resident Evil fan with a taste for new blood, it's Rombie.
Hello!
And finally, he's been given the all clear after his face and head started to turn a shade of crimson. It's George Trevor.
Hello.
Jesus Christ!
Oh my god.
This is going to be one of those ones, isn't it?
Coming up on today's podcast, which I'm sure you'll know is the first in our new season, Season 6, we'll be looking at the latest news before cracking open the champagne to celebrate 20 years of Resident Evil Code Veronica, the original Dreamcast exclusive. And after the controversial ending of last season's quiz, we start afresh once again with Season 6 of Neptune's Biohazard quiz. We have lots to get through, but we'll start with the news. A bit of special news to kick off proceedings. As you would have seen by now on our Facebook and Twitter and Discord, we have released a little teaser trailer for what we have been teasing for quite a while now. Our brand new website, www.residentevilpodcast.com. You can go there now. You can't see a lot, but there's a little coming soon tidbit. It is our brand new website, and suddenly it all becomes clear as to why we have changed our name. This has been in the works for a good couple of months, and we look forward to sharing with you the completed project going forward. I personally want to say a big thanks to Rob as well for his excellent trailer, and our friend of the show, Sonny Bauer, for his voiceover work. The Resident Evil podcast has always been a podcast for all, with a wide range of knowledge and skills that we hope everyone finds enjoyable. The website will be our DLC, if you like, a place where we can bring extra content to the masses. For example, it will be the home to my previous editorials and Resident Evil Gaiden, as well as the answer card for Biohazard Stars 2, so people can play along with that. But there will be lots of other things coming when the website is launched very soon, but it's not a dedicated fan site like Biohaze or something like that, so don't expect an article-based website. It's just our little add-on for the podcast. Our main focal point will continue to be the podcast, but it's something we hope everyone will enjoy. I can also announce that to celebrate the launch of the website, be sure to keep your eyes on our social media outlets in the coming weeks. We'll be running a special free-to-enter competition for both Facebook and Twitter that you will certainly want to enter. The reason? Well, we're giving away a couple of prizes. So the top prize will be a brand new copy of Resident Evil 7 for Xbox One, signed by director Koshi Nakanishi and producer Masashinka Kawata. So that is our very special prize. It's signed.
That's a very cool prize.
It is
It never fails, Nick. It never fails.
I just can't read
Just make
English,
sure-
Japanese.
Nick, just make sure you spell the names correctly when you sign the copy.
They are signed by the director and producer, so that's exciting. And our second prize, so there'll be 2 up for grabs. John?
If you're not an Xbox owner and you don't want the game, the alternative prize is a Biohazard 4 soundtrack book, which is a collectible art book with 2 audio CDs with the game's soundtrack. Biohazard Revelations art book, Biohazard 5 art book, Biohazard 6 art book, and a t-shirt of some description.
We'll be doing that prize and showing you how to enter just as the website launches, and then we'll announce the winners in a future podcast. So the first big bit of gaming news, of course, was that Resident Evil 3 Nemesis trailer was released. The second trailer, should I say. Entitled Nemesis, it showed a lot more of the big man in action. It also had good looks at Tyrell and Murphy, Nikolai and Mikhail, and that was all followed up with some bios on the Resident Evil social media outlets as well. Episode 59 will be our final Resident Evil 3 preview, so we won't go into too much detail, but what's everyone's thoughts on the new trailer?
I think Nemesis looks great in action, and like I said in the video I put up on the YouTube, I'm a lot more comfortable with this one. In the run-up to Resident Evil 2, I was despairing at the kind of damage it was going to do to the series, but because we know the sort of stance that Resident Evil 2 took, I'm sort of all for them just going crazy and really embracing the changes they can make. So yeah, I'm quite intrigued with it. I just hope that, once we get it out of the way, we can get back on track with the, pushing the story forward. But as a game, it looks great fun. Nemesis looks great in action, and I'm continued to be impressed with how they seem to have depicted Jill, because she seems entirely accurate, which was one of the biggest problems I had with Resident Evil 2 and its characters, the remake.
I am warming to the look of Nemesis a lot more now, seeing the full artwork. I kind of like the design a bit more than I originally did. The characters as a redesign for a remake, I think are all good. I think Carlos is still the only one that I'm a little bit not perfect about, but everyone else looks like a version of the character. And if they're all based off this photogrammetry thing for the RE engine, then it means that they've found people that fit the original designs reasonably pretty well, I think, which is pretty impressive, to be honest.
I'm slightly more enthusiastic actually about the game now. I think this style over the shoulder, it lends itself more to a more action-based game, whereas RE2, the remake, fell down after you left the RPD and kind of the atmosphere went for me. If this is more action orientated and the streets and Nemesis for me look wonderful, I'm kind of more looking forward to it, almost treating it like the Resident Evil 3 installments from Umbrella Chronicles, and almost like just an off the rails version of that. My own headcanon will always be the original R3, and so I'm not going to get het up about the changes. I'm sort of looking forward to it as just a action based Resident Evil game with an RE3 skin.
You said your headcanon will be RE3. That could still be the actual canon. Batman?
Yeah, I would echo those opinions. I mean, it's a reimagining of 3, isn't it? So I'm wanting them to embrace the change, and from the looks of these 2 trailers, they seem to be pushing it even further than what they did with Resident Evil 2. I'm very pleased that the UBCS characters seem to be getting a bigger role. Characters like Tyrell going to the RPD with Carlos, and Cable Car now being in the subway, and there seems to be Raccoon City survivors in there with them. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And, once we have the complete reimagined story of Raccoon City available, I think then we can sort of delve deeper into the canon and where it's going to sit in the larger series going forward.
Next bit of news still relates to Resident Evil 3 is that Capcom have released details, finally, of the European Collector's Edition. For a mere £215, you get a copy of Resident Evil 3, the lenticular package version, the nice Jill Valentine statue, the 2-disc physical soundtrack CD, something you didn't get in the American release, art book, and reversible map of Raccoon City poster.
Don't forget the wonderful collectible box that it all comes in.
The collectible box, yes. The artwork, though, is, I think, the only thing I'm really, really interested in. Project N and Project R, I'm obviously referring to Nemesis and I'm guessing Resistance. That will be interesting to see if there's any kind of additional lore and background information on this particular Nemesis. See if it differs at all from the information from the OG Resident Evil 3. But, these collector's edition. How did you get on in pre-ordering that, Sean?
Why? Why, Nick? Why would you do this to me? Basically, the sale went live at 4:00 in the afternoon while I was at work, and an hour later it was sold out. So, yeah, that's great. And I just find it just really disappointing that the fans of the series, and I know a lot of people missed out on this collector's edition, to then go on eBay and see literally dozens on there for 3 times the asking price, is a problem that's becoming ever more common with these collector's editions and things like that.
It's disgusting.
Because this is exactly the same thing that happened with the Resident Evil 2.
It that happens with every collector's edition and every special whatever, and isn't just video games. It might be music and movies and all that sort of stuff. It's the same thing, unfortunately. It's pretty disgusting.
Whether it's worth it, even at 215, is a different question entirely. Also, someone's mocked up, I've seen going around Twitter, a Code Veronica one, which was quite awesome.
A really good job.
Yeah.
Final bit of gaming news, again, kind of tags on a bit to Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil Resistance, which of course is coming as part of Resident Evil 3. CVX Freak, who is well known in the community, he's picked up a dummy box of Resident Evil 3 and he revealed to the world that Resistance looks to be an online-only game. So the much fabled offline singular player mode is in fact Resident Evil 3. So anyone looking to play single player for Resistance is going to be slightly disappointed.
Yeah, and obviously this then goes in with the announcement that official PlayStation magazine said that Resistance has effectively replaced Mercenaries for the remake. It is a real shame.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's a shame because it's so important. I really think the Mercenaries mode in Resident Evil 3 was really the first time a mini game in the franchise really became its own thing, and so it's really important. And it's obviously something that they continued to play with, right through numerous sequels. So it's a shame not to see a new version of it in this. But you never know; they could add it later as a DLC for free, even because they've done that before. So we'll wait and see.
It looks okay in my opinion, and it could be the thing that persuades me to buy PlayStation Online or whatever it's called to actually go online and play with you guys.
I mean, we played the beta and it's actually not bad. It's actually pretty good. It's just how much depth it's got to it will determine how long it lasts.
It's unfortunate because it's just taken a scenario that they could have placed the characters from the main game, and you could have played as Mikhail and the different UPSC and maybe even Dario, and instead we've got these teenagers instead. It's a shame.
I think they're just trying to add a bit of narrative flair to the online part, which I guess makes sense. And who knows, eventually there may be unlockable characters that are based off the franchise anyway, like they often do for these things.
We've got a tiny bit of site news. Myself, Neptune, will be attending Portsmouth Gaming and Anime Convention representing the Resident Evil podcast. I will be doing my very own panel / podcast workshop. It promises to be a good day, even if I'm not there, but I am. My first ever convention and first ever panel, so naturally I am bricking it, but never mind. But if anyone is in the local area, so along the south coast, please come along and say hi to me and join me for my panel. Anyone there will be gratefully received. I will be attending on Sunday the 1st of March 2020. It's on for 2 days, on the 29th of February and the 1st of March, but I'll only be there on the 1st of March. I'll be there all day on the convention floor, but my panel will be taking place at 3 o'clock. If there's any changes to this, obviously we'll update Twitter, Facebook and our Discord servers.
How much is the autograph and photo opportunity?
Because it's my first, if anyone wants a photograph, why would they? Why the fuck would they want a photograph of me? You can still get discounted tickets. They're available at www.portsmouthanimecon.com. Here you'll find all the details, other guests attending, and obviously links to the cheaper day tickets and how to get there in Portsmouth. It should be exciting. I am looking forward to it.
Is there going to be a section in the workshop on how to host the perfect quiz?
They should be asking me.
Yes.
So final bit of site news, just a bit of very quick streaming news podcast. As you know, we've all been playing Code Veronica. Something that, Rob, you've just done as a kind of experiment to see how well it goes down in the community. A highlight, low-light video detailing your playthrough.
Yeah, I chucked together my very many lowlights and a few highlights and a few gameplay tips and chucked together in a video. It's about half an hour and did a commentary over the top. So I thought I'd see what people thought of it so far. It seems pretty positive. So
yeah, it's well worth checking out. Lots of interesting tidbits that people may not know about Code Veronica and so forth. That does conclude the news, so we now turn our attention to 20 glorious years of Resident Evil Code Veronica. Happy birthday, my old friend.
Perfect. Go on. Get out of here. This place is finished. I don't know, it might have been a special forces team. But in any case, this prison's been taken over. The troops are being wiped out.
What are you saying?
You're free to leave the complex. But you may as well know you have no chance of getting off this island.
And what about you? What are you going to do?
Don't worry about me.
Code Veronica, the original rule-breaker entry into the series. The first to skip from the PlayStation and to the Dreamcast and showcase what was then next-gen graphics. And what graphics they were. Between the high-quality FMVs and in-game cutscenes, this was Resident Evil like we'd never seen before. Taking all the best bits about the classic PlayStation trilogy, updating the tank controls and pre-rendered backgrounds, whilst digging into Umbrella's history on an Umbrella-owned island. Surely it's the ultimate Resident Evil experience. Well, Code Veronica has a checkered history. It's too long, the controls are rubbish, storyline ushered in the supernatural elements we see in future titles are just many of the complaints that have been levied against it. So, 20 years since the Dreamcast launch, we are celebrating this seminal title in the only way we know how, a retrospective playthrough of the game. We've all dug into our old copies and played through it, and we're now going to basically go through the entire game and what we picked up on, all our best bits, worst bits, as it may be the case, any particular quirks or reactions that have happened in the game that we just want to celebrate today. Before we start though, player versions, what version was everyone playing? Sean?
So I was on the HD version on the PlayStation 3, the actual download one off the EU PlayStation Network.
George?
I initially put in the physical copy. I've got the Asian physical copy of the HD selection, but all the files are in Japanese. So I then went with the downloaded version, which is in English, but it's also optimized for Xbox One. It's backwards compatible, so it looks fantastic if you play it on Xbox One.
Batman?
Yeah, I played the Resident Evil HD selection on the PS3.
Rob?
I played the PS2 version on the PS4, the American version, not the European.
No one played the actual Dreamcast version that we're celebrating.
I'm denied because I pulled my Dreamcast out for the Resident Evil 3 episode, and I had just put it away. So I was like about a week before we had actually decided to do this as the podcast, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to pull it all out again. so I considered it, because I have the original release, but I also have the complete version on Dreamcast. If I actually had to pick a preferential version, it would probably be that.
Well, I played easily the worst version out of all of you, so I played the PlayStation 2 PAL version on PlayStation 2.
Harsh.
That is harsh.
Yeah, on an HD TV as well. So, yeah, we had some issues. But there we go. So that's good. So that's sorted. So Code Veronica starts with possibly one of the most, I'd say, infamous introductions. It certainly got its love, but it certainly got its hate. But before we go there, just as a real side point, just something I just mentioned before we started, I was really pleased that the very introduction of the game, i.e. the kind of musical interlude just before it gets to the start menu, actually shows nothing of the game other than what's in the introduction video, which is quite cool because Resident Evil 2 and 3 show clips from throughout the game, which arguably could be seen as a spoiler, whereas the kind of introduction in Code Veronica only shows the first FMV, which I thought was quite nice, so you weren't spoiled at all. Anyway, let's quickly talk about the introduction to the game. Batman, what's your views on the on the opening FMV?
Well, it's awful, isn't it? I mean, you know, if you look how absolutely fantastic the Resident Evil 3 intro was, to go from something like that to this, just watching it just puts me in a bad mood. That intro sequence, I absolutely hate it. There is nothing good about it, from the attack helicopter shooting its own building to Claire dropping the gun. It's just ridiculous. I hate it.
I will admit it seems more like something out of the Resident Evil movies that came afterwards than...
Yeah, I mean, if you could imagine James Cameron directing the Resident Evil 3 intro, then no prizes for guessing who directed the Code Veronica intro. You can sort of tell Paul Anderson would watch this, and this sort of thing is what would inspire him to make the movies. Not playing through remake, you know, going through a dark gothic mansion with zombies. It's not that wants him to make the films. It's stuff like this intro sequence. So, fuck it.
Everyone else was quite ambivalent towards it. Yeah, it was fun.
I will say, from a sort of 20th anniversary sort of look back, I remember at the time seeing that intro for the first time on the Dreamcast. It must be said the image quality of the FMV was absolutely exceptional back then. It was truly, in terms of like detail, the close-ups of Claire when she wakes up in the prison cell, I mean, it was like close to lifelike at the time. You know, the detail, just in like the close-ups of like her eyes and her lips and stuff, was just a level of detail that, again, the series kind of ushered in for the Dreamcast. It was a nice showcase. Even though it was an FMV sequence, it was still a nice showcase.
I was going to say, yeah, Capcom was really pushing CG graphics through the late 90s, early 2000s. Resident Evil 2 was up for a couple of awards with the SIGGRAPH Awards. I think Onimusha the next year won, and that's the opening scene of both Onimusha 1 and 2 are still really outstanding, and Code Veronica is definitely up there at that level. It's about the little details that just hadn't previously been in these sorts of FMVs before, like when the tanks explode, there's lots of little bits of debris, the shattering glass as the helicopter hits the windows, and the hair falling past Claire's eye in slow motion, all that sort of stuff, though, and the detail of the reflection, all that. Those are details that just hadn't really been achieved so much in full motion video until that point.
It is worth saying, however, that the upscale that the PlayStation 3 HD version that I played is awful. They've really lost a lot of the detail, and bizarrely on some shots, the frame rate seems to just drop really dramatically. I don't think you would have seen that, though, on your version, Rob, because I think from what I've seen of the PlayStation 4 port, the FMV actually holds up pretty well on.
Yes and no, like, it's still the original PS2 compression version, so what you get is surprisingly more like old school pixelation, so like fine lines become quite line pixels, and in some ways it gives it its own kind of aesthetic and makes it feel a little bit more retro than it actually is, which isn't a bad thing, but it's definitely not the best version quality wise. I still think probably that Dreamcast re-release of Code Veronica X Code Veronica Complete is probably got the best quality version of those cutscenes on it still.
Did you not get a nice bit of excitement that, we saw the Paris labs that had been teased in Resident Evil 3?
I'll be honest, at the time, for many, many years, I have loved that sequence. But in recent years, the points that John makes about like the helicopter just laying waste to its own building, like they see Claire, the biggest threat Umbrella's ever experienced, that they would literally shoot their own soldiers and lay waste to their own building just to get to her, does seem a little bit ridiculous now.
I find it hard to put my finger on why I kind of give it a free pass to the trailer, because I really agree with the point Batman makes about how wonderful the Resident Evil 3 trailer was. It's the best in the series, and then we're served this up. I just think, Rombie makes the point of how good it looked at the time, and for me, I think it was just so spectacular and it looked so fantastic, and it kind of, to me, screams developers that are wanting to put Resident Evil kind of on a higher stage and take it out of Raccoon City, and it's always been kind of influenced. Resident Evil, the developers, Japanese ones, have always been influenced by this, the American film Speed, RoboCop, and so I just think that they were just trying something, just trying to put it on a bigger, grander scale. And Code Veronica Freak, I've heard talk about how in Japan, particularly with the CGI films, they don't tend to link it to the canon as much in terms of, would they want to, destroy the Paris lab, shoot it up that much. And it's more just about, about the scene and how spectacular and how great it looked. So I don't think it would have really occurred to them that it was that jarring.
What did you think of now that we're in the kind of prison and you can wake up and you hear the bombs going off, treated to the first bit of atmosphere, if you like, within the prison cell that Claire's captured in?
I think it's a great way to start a game, and I think Batman said in the past that Resident Evil, this series, is always great when it's a mystery and you kind of thrown in at the deep end. You don't know quite what's going on, and people mentioned that this game is bland, and I just think in so many different scenes it's anything but. And Rodrigo, the most beloved characters, I think he's fantastic for kind of a side character. It really throws you in at the action. You've got a lot of FMV scenes, don't you, at the beginning as well, that really put you in the action and tell you what's going on, with the zombies at the beginning.
It would almost be a stronger opening, I think, like you say, when Rodrigo comes down and it's dark and he gives you the impression he's possibly a zombie until you turn your lighter on. I think it would have been a stronger opening if they hadn't actually gave you the intro sequence and you just started with Claire waking up and you could hear the bombing and you wondered what the hell was going on, and the story of how she was captured was told in flashbacks throughout the game. I think that would have made it a stronger opening.
I'm kind of with John on that, because you could have created more of a narrative, and it still doesn't mean if they wanted to do the stuff they did with that intro that they couldn't, but I guess they wanted a big flashy kind of action-based intro just to kind of get us into the game.
People that were following a couple of my earlier comments when I first started up my playthrough of this back in November, because it will take me that long to do it, I randomly had the infinite rocket launcher in my inventory when I started the game. No idea how. I'm certainly not good enough to get it in the game. My time was about 11 hours. which I thought was pretty good for me. But I didn't use it, so do not fear, folks. I was able to get through the game without using it. Interesting point about Rodrigo, George, because his character stays quite consistent throughout, yet people's reaction to him is quite different. Claire is quite concerned, oh, let me kind of help you with the medicine, even though she's kind of been captured. Chris just does not give a fuck about him.
Yeah, he asked him about Claire, and Rodrigo's answer is quite helpful. Like, yeah, I helped a girl called Claire. And then Chris, like, shoves him in the shoulder. He's already injured. Like, you know exactly who I'm talking about.
He just sees Rodrigo as Umbrella, though.
Exactly,
doesn't he?
exactly.
I think it makes sense in the narrative as well, because clearly Claire's not there, and Rodrigo's saying to him, oh, yes, I helped a girl. And it's like, well, I want to know what happened to her. So, like, tell me, don't just, I was thinking about that at this time, too, yeah.
I thought, though, and in terms of the kind of initial impressions before we get into the prison area, a nice little changes, different things that you didn't see in the original game. Like, as Claire runs, her hair goes up in the wind, if you like, in the air as well. Small graphical changes from the original PlayStation trilogy really helped build up the atmosphere. And the lighting, even on the PlayStation 2 version, folks, the lighting with the actual lighter was really effective. They make really good use of using the lighter throughout the game, and the little kind of, light that it creates and helping you see in dark places. And obviously it can be used to stop bats attacking you as well, but you never saw that on PlayStation really, and this just showing the graphical improvements that the Dreamcast brought to the table.
I have to say, if anyone has the opportunity who hasn't played HD selection, you really need to try, because there is an issue with this game being too dark played on certain televisions, particularly those that don't have a backlight, because if you have to turn the brightness up, and then it just gives this impression of a lot of the colours being washed out. And I know that's why in places it can be a bit bland, and there are so many rooms that have just so many sumptuous colours in Code Veronica. So I just unless I'm in combat, I always walk around with the lighter, and it looks just so wonderful. So if you can get an opportunity, if you haven't played, you really should try those versions out.
It's worth saying that in the HD version, for those that aren't aware, Capcom imported the Code Veronica X game into the Framework MT engine, and it uses an entirely new way of doing the lighting, and you actually do get like genuine areas of darkness now, and the lighter becomes an actual necessity in places where it wasn't in the original game. The original game has a kind of weird sort of fogging that it uses to simulate darkness. It's not quite as effective when you look back now, but it's certainly an easier way to play the game.
The interesting thing is, as I said on the commentary, the MT Framework version has its pros and cons, but it's definitely a sharper, nicer way to play the game. The translucent textures are really good as well, so water effects, all that sort of stuff have all been improved. The light shafts have been improved. Then there's also this weird depth of field filter, which I really wish you could change or turn off. It kind of ruins the aesthetic, because it's pretty much stuck on the one same depth of field the entire way through when you use it. So things that are in the foreground that you're actually supposed to pay attention to, you end up being softened, and it gives the game a very nice look, but it sometimes gives counter to what the game's actually trying to get you to do as well, which is a bit unfortunate.
Some of the effects is things I noticed, the little details, like the fire effects were very good for the time. I also really appreciated tiny details, like the bugs just crawling around on the wall. Posed obviously no threat, they weren't infected with the T-virus, but again, it just kind of started to build up that picture of this is a bit of a dank place.
I think the rain's really effective to build in the atmosphere at the beginning as well.
Absolutely. And just as a point, if you can play this in 5.1 surround sound, absolutely incredible with the rain.
I was about to say the audio as well. Yeah, so it's just the sound effects, but the constant. The prison area, for example, there's a constant soundtrack of just like zombies moaning. Pretty much in the outdoor area, they're kind of off in the distance. It's a very nice atmosphere building kind of sound effect as well, along with that rain.
With regard to like where it is historically within the series as well, I got a huge buzz out of the fact that you were able to examine items again properly. I thought that was sorely missing from like 2 and 3.
And this is a game where you do have to examine the items quite a lot, and you do pick up some obscure items along your adventure, but cracking on, you kind of, once you're out of the prison cell, you then move into the main prison area. I think this is something that I spoke with you, John, about actually privately. The backtracking in this game is notorious, but it's because, and I think I've nailed it, folks, I'm sure everyone's worked this out 20 years ago, but perhaps I've only just worked out now, that it's because Rockfort Island itself is one huge hub area, and that's not what arguably we've been used to in the games. So normally you'd have a smaller hub area and you just work your way around that, whereas this game treats the prison, the training facility, the palace, the airport all as one huge hub area. So it expects you to do the backtracking, and that's what takes the time.
My problem with that is I suppose you could compare it to the city areas in Resident Evil 3, but you could do those in a different order, whereas in Code Veronica, unless I'm remembering incorrectly, the only sort of optional thing you can do is where you put the blue eagle plate. Do you take it to the guillotine first, or do you put it in the relief at the top of the stairs where Alfred tries to shoot you with his sniper rifle? Other than that, you're fixed on a set path.
Yeah, I think you're right.
My thought on it is that, yeah, there's truth definitely to that kind of hub world thing, but I think what they were going for was kind of that feel of the original Resident Evil, like where you find an item and you go somewhere and it unlocks certain other things, and you've got a few different branching paths and you can change certain orders of things. But the difference between that and Resident Evil 3, which John mentioned as well, is that Resident Evil 3, yeah, there's a little backtracking, but it always feels like you're progressing slowly forward, like there's an incremental forward, and the same with the original Resident Evil 1 as well. You're exploring more of the mansion, you're kind of getting around. Code Veronica, because you end up spending so much time in these one areas, and what you end up finding is a lot of the things you have to get because of doors that are already blocked off in areas that you are seemingly already in. So you start feeling like you're trapped in that area for a long time, and that backtracking is all kind of concentrated at first into one area, then into 2 areas and 3 areas, and then on top of that, all of a sudden you're in, say, like the private residence, and you've got to realize you've got to go all the way back to the prison, or you've got to go all the way back to the training facility, and all of a sudden it feels like, oh, I've got to make that slog across the map. It's quite large to get all the way just to use this item I've now picked up. So then it feels counterintuitive because it's now no longer one small hub area, it's one giant hub area. And yeah, it's just a weird feeling to that whole thing. It's not as well finessed as perhaps the other games when it comes to that sort of stuff.
That's the problem with the backgrounds being so bland as well, I think. It jumps out at you because, like you said, if you want to get from the art room in the Arkley Mansion to the dining room, you've got the choice of going upstairs or back through the passageways and through the art gallery, through the main hall, etc. But on this, it's just a bland perimeter fence with some fog and absolutely no background. Resident Evil's renowned for its locations being really authentic and really atmospheric, whereas this, I actually felt I was in a computer game because there's no background, there's just a perimeter wall, a path, a couple of fire effects. I'm not saying that every environment was like this, but some of it just felt like it was loading parts of a computer game, which I know we are, obviously, but it didn't feel real.
I take your point, but I think it's unfair as well to make the comparison with 2 previous games that are pre-rendered backgrounds. So you have got these portraits behind you that you're looking at, that remain static, and you can find the detail, and you can find more detail every time you traverse backwards and forwards. Because for me, I'd be interested. I don't think there is any more backtracking in Code Veronica. It's just that you have to give it credit, I think, Batman and people that make that point, which is a correct one, but you have to take into consideration the fact that Code Veronica, you have now the dynamic camera and the 3D models. So you don't have the static backgrounds, because it obviously, if you did, then during that traversing that you're doing between, Alfred's residence and Alexia's palace, or going back to the prison facility, you'd have those pre-rendered backgrounds. So the actual items in the rooms themselves aren't bland at all. If you look at some of the detail in the palace,
I think that's the difference there, George, is that it's like when you're in an interior location, there is a lot of detail in the concept of what the rooms are that are nice inside, but when you're in the outdoor areas, they are very limiting in the fact there's a lot of fogging for the draw distance. There's a very much a repeated texture kind of quality to it, and it doesn't feel as good as the stuff on the interiors. But you spend a lot of time traversing through these areas that connect the kind of more detailed areas a lot.
I agree with that entirely.
I want to point out one thing, that this is the one thing that's always bugged me since the original game, and I'll point this out just to prove how boxy this whole thing feels in a way that doesn't make sense. So when you go across the prison bridge, you put the thing in the gate and you go across, and there's the Jeep and all that sort of stuff. There's a tunnel where the road tracks go into, right? And that tunnel, for the life of me, I cannot figure out where it would go. The thing that's kind of weird is that once you go up the 2 flights of stairs, and then you go along the path and you go up the stairs again to the entrance for the residence, there's a bridge as well that's also broken. And are they trying to tell me that those 2 things are a road that connects? If so, there's a massive vertical difference there. Then where does that tunnel go? Like
vertical geographical issues in Resident Evil.
Yeah. And you start looking at in the environments against the maps and how they overlay. But apparently where that road is in the front of the mansion, underneath is where the sub is, or it's sideways to it, but it doesn't work out. Like geographical issues based on the fact that they boxed them into these weird little areas, and it kind of breaks that illusion of it being a cohesive environment to me as well.
Let's start with the prison, because that's our first place we explore. So we meet with zombies first, as in a really homage to zombie movies of yesteryear. here, isn't it? You walk into a graveyard and up come actual zombies from dead corpses, which of course has never happened before in the series up until this point.
Yeah, as you said, Nick, this is the first time the virus has the ability to raise the dead, because in previous games, the T-virus is unable to infect a dead corpse and revive it, because the virus needs live cells to propagate. And you mentioned the graveyard zombies in Resident Evil 3, George, has been an exception to that rule, but the writer of 3 confirmed that those people were recently infected and buried because the virus sort of puts your body in a state of apparent death. Oh. Think of people like Marvin and Edward Dewey and Forrest Spire. The virus infects them, eventually stops the heart, and then revives them as a zombie. The difference with the graveyard zombies in Code Veronica is they were all just dead and buried without exposure to any virus. The rainwater from the storm has seeped the virus through the soil and infected the corpses, and it's all got to do with this new experimental strain having extra added influence from the progenitor virus, and that's set the trend for every T-virus that follows. It always has the ability to revive the dead from this game onwards.
And it's a tough opening, actually. I think it's one of the harder ones, because unlike, say, Resident Evil 2 and 3, where you can kind of like dodge the zombies or maybe just take out one, you've got to take out quite a lot here.
Yeah. And you've got a knife if you picked it up. If you didn't pick it up, you got nothing. You didn't realise it was there on the table. This is something I'll bring up, because back in 2000, people moving from the pre-rendered, there's a sparkle in the background, to like physical items that you had to look out for was a big deal. Like people, when they first started the game, they like missed the knife entirely. It's just lying on the table, and they go, right, you know, there was no real indication that you could pick it up other than there was a knife on the table. If you looked at it, you would notice it, but if you didn't notice it, you just thought it was part of the table decoration. You just walk on right past.
I got lucky. I just got through the zombies by sheer luck.
I'm going to put this out here now because it's the right time to do it. So the enemies in Code Veronica are like probably consistently the most frustrating, I think, of the franchise, in that you can have complete luck with them, like John's just saying. You can dodge them and they'll be slow reacting, like zombies in particular, or you'll get them like they can turn on a dime and grab you.
Yeah, I love that.
They can be very fast, and it's very random. Like you never know what you're going to get from any zombie. You can run past the same zombie 3 or 4 times and he'll be like, oh, and turn slowly, and then all of a sudden on a dime grabs you as soon as you run past the exact same spot every time. And it's either you find it thrilling or you find it extremely frustrating. One or the other, I think.
I did like that, and like you say, I think it might have been the very first time in this series when, you know, like you say, they are on top of you so quickly, and the random nature of that, but also the fact that I think, was it the first time in the game, I don't know if respawning is the correct word, but you can clear that area, and this is why that first scene, I just pushed them away with the knife. I don't bother to kill them all. Is that,
yeah, if you kill them, they will come back when you have to come back again, yeah.
It does that throughout the entire game, which is another issue with the backtracking. It's very naughty in that respect. There's a couple of incidents where it cheats. Like you mentioned the graveyard, like literally at the start, where you're suddenly surrounded and you've got very, very little chance of getting out of there without getting hit. And that's the very first encounter in the game. And there's another one where you go through the metal detector and the zombies eventually come through the window. The only way to avoid that is step out of the room and wait for them all to slowly follow you out.
The easiest way to avoid that is to actually trigger the alarm intentionally before you make the replacement thing out of the alloy. Then it never triggers them to smash through the windows in the first place.
And you can't get through it, can you not?
No, you just reset it. The button's beside it. If you ever accidentally do it, of course they had to make it so that you could fix it. So yeah, on the wall to the right of the metal detector is a little switch. You just toggle it and all the shutters reopen. The exact order to do it, to stop the zombies from going through the window, is when you come through the second time, pick up one of the random items, the first aid spray, the flame or the gas rounds, run through it, it sets the alarm off, the shutters will close, then put the stuff in the box, go over to the machine, craft the alloy crest, and then come back to the wall and there's a little button, hit the button and it reopens all the shutters for you, and then you can continue through and you don't have to worry about the zombies. Easy.
Clever.
Never knew that.
So what I really liked about the prison area is that it was quite a unique setting during that time. We had a bit of a prison scene obviously in Survivor, but that was very much a modern prison, whereas this was very much had a prisoner of war feel, very much like, you know, and there's lots of World War II references throughout this game, but you know, you have, you know, long buildings, you know, bunk beds, and some of the files that you'd pick up, and you're quickly building into the atmosphere of...
It's very sinister.
Very sinister. I mean, one of my favourite, you know, you find a guillotine. What the hell's there a guillotine? But it's a precursor to the torture equipment that you see later in the anatomist's room, which is hell on earth, isn't it? Go down to his secret area, you're like, oh my god, he's an absolute nutter. I just like the feel that, you know, it was very much, you know, with the rain and the atmosphere coming in, and then when you started to read the files of what these prisoners were going through, you know, and then you're encountering the zombies and they're hauling themselves through the window. It's very hard to find that atmosphere has ever been matched since.
I mean, a lot of it goes back to, I think, as we all know, originally there's more of a Nazi connection with, the original concepts for Alexia and Alfred when they were the Krugers. And obviously, while that was taken out for obvious, sensitivity reasons, you've kind of still got kind of without the Nazi skin, you've still got the kind of the models. So, it very much does have that feel of a concentration camp, where you find Bob's file and, just the whole place just feels of death, just almost smells of death, doesn't it?
It does. Honestly, I think it's one of the most chilling, especially with the music. Wonderful music. It's harp-like with a bit of deep bass. We know the soundtrack to Code Veronica is one of the highlights of the series, and the whole musical scene at that point is so chilling. And then to combine, you got that kind of homage to the original game with the Cerberus kind of first-person view under the stairs of the Cerberus coming, or zombie dogs, whatever you call them, coming towards you. I thought that was good. Sean, what's your views of the kind of prison area?
It's quite well constructed in terms of like how its puzzles unfold. Whether you find it interesting or not, I don't think it holds up as well as like things like the police station or even the mansion. I think it's probably the most drab of the openings, and you do have to endure a wonderful NPC known by the name of Steve Burnside. I will say, despite its sort of drab and very sort of dark and depressing setting, it's quite memorable. I remember it very well. I'm not a big fan of like the overly telegraphed shots, like, the steady walking down the steps or the body being pulled under the building, because I just don't think the actual reveal of the dogs is anything special, because it's not like you're fighting dogs for the first time in the series. It's fine, if you like. I don't think many people particularly enjoy the security box.
Well,
backwards and forwards.
I mean, that haunts gamers for years. That noise.
Yeah.
Oh dear, it's awful.
Security box. Sorry.
I don't know. I know you're a big fan. I actually think the prison area is one of the locations of Code Veronica. I think it's one of the most memorable, more so than perhaps like the official residence.
See, I like Code Veronica more as it gets more into the other areas.
Okay.
So I don't tend to hang around the prison too much. I tend to race through it.
But again, I think you've got to look at the models themselves, because, as I say, just take into consideration the fact that you're going to have these pre-rendered backdrops. So when you talk about things being bland or drab, it's not that I disagree, but I just think that drabness comes from, like I say, just having the dynamic camera and this being the first 3D Resident Evil game.
Well, and at the end of the day as well, you have to ask yourself how much detail is a prison really going to have anyway. It's not, we're talking like grey walls and prison cells, aren't we? So
yeah, I was exactly the point I was about to say. Drab is constructed on the idea that this is supposed to be an oppressive prison space, so that sort of colour spectrum's probably right.
When you go to the bunk beds and that, there's a lovely detail there, and I think everybody was always impressed at the time with the swinging light creating like shadows on the table.
Yes.
In the mess hall sort of place.
And the noise it makes.
It never fails to surprise me. Obviously, this was the first game that had like real genuine close-ups with these characters in the Resident Evil series, and it was the first time you actually had like the lips move in the cutscenes. And even though it's like quite archaic to what you expect in today's day and age, especially with the photo realistic faces of the recent games, I still love the fact that this was the first time, like, when Steve does something that like affects Claire like on an emotional kind of level, I really appreciate like the close-ups, and you can feel her emotion through her expression.
Yes.
Which was like a first for the series. And I remember when I first played it on the Dreamcast, again, this is like, it felt like a turning point in terms of like how storytelling and emotional things were going to be, in terms of storytelling and cutscenes and seeing character faces. Up until this point, so many people were just used to like bobbing heads and mouths that didn't move. So it was a real sort of step in and into a new generation. It was a good show. Again, I use this term showcase. It was a good showcase for the Dreamcast at the time.
I just wanted to quickly say, Sean's so right, because I was playing it today. Something that occurs to Steve, pain, you can really see the emotion in Claire's face as she's reacting to what Steve's going through. And I actually thought to myself, Bethesda recently have been criticised for their character models and their faces. And even in more recent Resident Evil games, I just kind of felt that I haven't seen that emotion in more detailed, more modern renders. But I really felt that what Sean's saying, particularly about Claire's reaction to some of the things that Steve's going through, the emotions you can see in her face.
I don't know if this is a controversial point. I actually prefer the look of Claire in the game cutscenes to the FMV. I think she looks a bit more almost like pixie-like in the FMVs, whereas I think she looks far more natural in the in-game cutscenes.
I don't think that's too controversial. I think I've heard that one before.
It's just something I've picked. Because there is backtracking, we don't want to keep backtracking in the podcast, so we're going to cover everything that you do in the prison area. So I kind of touched on it earlier. The anatomist's room, for me, was a real real highlight of the culmination of what they're actually doing at Rockfort Island, or at least what they're trying to do. And it's genuinely one of the most terrifying places ever. You solve all the puzzles, you pick up the glass eye, and God knows what you have to do, and then you're faced with these little mini cutscenes, if you like, of the anatomist running at you at 90 miles an hour.
And that file, the opening line, demon in my mind,
brilliant.
And I think when I first read it for the first time, I was almost thinking, this is Alfred, but no, there's another psycho that he's taken under his wing. And it says, doesn't he? Alfred's found a place for me, and I just love that area.
When you go into the actual basement, in the main room where all the torture equipment is, next to these two pools of water where they dunk the prisoners, there's a little table and a cigar box and a red chair. And you can just imagine Alfred just sitting there, just fucking watching them being tortured. It's really, really creepy. I always stare at that chair every time I go through that room.
It is, because it's nice. It's a real clean room, isn't it? Despite the fact that
reasonably clean, yeah.
all the horror.
That's a great point. I've never seen that. Next time I go into that room, I'm going to
just imagine him just sat there with some sherry and a cigar, just watching these fucking prisoners being tortured.
Because it's because it's that sort of table. It's like a sort of little smoking table.
I'm going to play the Devil's Advocate. I found that tonally, the shift when you come across, because I think, what is it? You come through the room, the medical bay, basically, and it seems like a normal doctor's, kind of like at a prison, like you'd expect it to look like, right? And then you go through the back room, and there's all these torture spikes and incinerator and rack beds and all this sort of stuff, and I'm just like, holy shit, where did this come from? I was like, this is hidden in the back, oh my god. And I just remember that tonal jarring shift going, oh, okay, so this is what they're actually doing to the prisoners when they wanted information from them. Okay, cool. And then that's one thing, you come out and it's the doctor you end up killing, you get the glass eye, and then you find out there's actually an entire separate torture basement. I thought the torture room was enough. There's a torture basement in this place? We need more?
But that was good. This is something that happened to me. I don't know if it happened to you guys, but when you go down the more stairs and you go to the torture basement, where you've got the room with the sword and the kind of gas, and you push it in, and then I was quite quick. I pegged it out of the room, and I was quite happy. That zombie chased me up the stairs. He went through the door. I never knew they could do that pre-remake.
With the sword still stuck in him?
Yes!
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I was like, I was really pleased that I was able to dodge him in time and get out of there. I thought, that's fine. And up he trundles. And I just didn't know that could happen.
Take it, everybody does notice the original mansion throwback in that room, which is the armour, the helmet, the shield, and the sword are represented on the armours.
That was good.
It was.
Nice touch. The whole game is indebted, especially to the original game.
Yes.
It's very much a callback for all the good and bad reasons to the original.
Well, that's specifically probably Antarctica. We'll get to that.
Did everybody make sure to take the detour to get the calicos, the dual pistols on their run?
I do, yes, because they're useful, because you do in a lot of places get surrounded quite quickly, so it's quite useful to take out the bow.
And who remembered to take the fire extinguisher with you, or do you leave it for your return trip later in the game?
I leave it in the item box, the metallic item box, and then I think you reminded me when I said I'm coming up to this point. I was like, oh, extinguisher.
If I've got the space, which I usually do, I'll take it for the reason that, as I was saying before, with that shutter system, with closing them so that the zombies don't come out. If you do that, when you come back later, the zombies are broken through anyway, regardless. I just take the thing so I don't have to worry about going down that hallway, because you can completely avoid them at that point if you just come in quickly, grab the items you need, and then run straight back out.
I got lucky because I took the fire extinguisher and put it in my item box. I wasn't planning on coming back to that area, but you've obviously got the option of moving the crate that's blocking the door, so you can get in the room where the computer is, where Steve found Chris. I planned on going back there simply to get a first aid spray that I'd left in the security box on that side of the room, but luckily for me, I only noticed the second time I went through that's where the B.O.W gas rounds are. So if I hadn't have gone back there, I would have missed them, and you obviously need them for the Tyrant fight on the plane, so I got lucky in that respect, because I could not remember in the game where the B.O.W gas rounds were.
Yeah, I wish someone told me that's what the B.O. gas rounds are for.
I'm sorry, Nick, could I not tell you this?
I put it out on our Discord. I said, what's everyone going to use that? But I'd already got past everyone said, use it on the Tyrant, on the aeroplane.
Tyrant, and you already passed. That's not everyone else's fault. That's your fault for running through the game and not checking earlier before you, as soon as you got them.
What do you tend to use them on, Nick, in previous playthroughs?
In playthroughs, right at the end of Claire's game, when you are wandering through the Antarctic terminal, the main area. If you remember it gets repopulated by zombies. The main sorting office area, huge.
So what B.O.W did you use it on, Nick?
Zombie.
Zombies, ladies and gentlemen.
You could say the clue was in the name, Nick. The anti-bow gas rounds. The most powerful bow in the game is the Tyrant. But the weakest is probably the zombie.
But it takes out all of them. That was the whole point. The gas fills the room, and I was able just to jolly through. They're all on the floor. I was quite happy with my outcome.
So the gas works against any T virus-based entity, but it doesn't work against any T Veronica based or anything other than biogenic weapons otherwise. I think it works on the hunters, zombies, and the tyrants.
It doesn't work on the Black Widow, does it? Because it mutates the Black Widow and makes it massive.
No, the clue is that you caused that when you go to get the gas mask and you pump the lab area with the bioweapon gas. It's the same stuff from the rounds in that room. And the spiders don't die. You go in there, they're still alive if you haven't killed them. So that gives you a clue that doesn't kill them.
But it's the one crawling underneath, isn't he?
Yeah, the one
you can't get underneath. You can't get to, yeah.
We're jumping ahead. So we have left the prison now, and we're traversing over that cavern that we've already briefly discussed about. I'm just looking at some of my notes which I made. This was months ago now. I said I loved the big cliff. So I completely disagree entirely with your comments about how bland it was, because I thought it looked really good.
It's a cliff.
No, but I said the scene across the ravine is what I wrote.
I can sit with what you're probably more meaning, Nick, which is I like the concept of the fact it's a big open area that we hadn't really seen of that type in the franchise, especially at that point. It was kind of cool in that regard. It's not to do with the blandness of texture work or the fact that it just turns into a grey fog, because obviously in a modern game, instead of it being a grey fog, we would have like a huge cavern, but it would be like you could see a river or whatever.
Oh, what we're supposed to see, yeah. What I noted more, though, was the fact that the rain stops as you go across the ravine, and then the audio changes and you can hear the ocean and the wind, which I thought was quite a nice change in dynamic, suggesting that you are now moving on to a different area. You're not in the suppressed area of the game with the rain, which perhaps there's symbolism there, and then you're going into a bit more calmer areas, namely the military training facility and the palace.
There's actually a really nice little bit in the Dark Side Chronicles retelling in that section where you're going across the bridge and you see, interestingly, it keeps raining throughout the Dark Side Chronicles version, but you can see Alfred dressed as Alexia stood on the top of the cliff singing a lullaby, and as you get closer she moves away and disappears into the fog. It's quite good.
Oh, very Psycho-esque.
Yeah.
I noticed they added backgrounds into that as well, so if you're going through the prison, instead of just a blank background, you can see a lighthouse on the corner of the island with its light spinning round.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
When you're in the military training facility, in certain angles you can see Alfred and Alexia's mansion on the hill. So that was pretty cool.
Well, that's a nice segue, though, into the military training facility, which is our second miniature hub area, where you do spend quite a lot of time. The music changes, and I felt it was appropriately more of a militaristic vibe going on. And as you enter into the main courtyard area, you are introduced to not Gravedigger, or the Gulpworm. Does anyone attempt to kill it, or does one just run?
No. I don't think in all the years I've played this game I've ever killed it there, because there's just no point. It's so easy to dodge.
I've killed it with the rocket launcher when I've had the rocket launcher, because it's just fun to do. You shoot it with one rocket and it wimps out.
I was going there, I was toying with the idea of killing it, because I couldn't remember if it gave you anything, if there was any actual benefit of doing it, other than being able to safely explore the area.
That's it. That's literally it. There's nothing. I think there's some bow gun rounds on one of the barrels, and that's the only thing in the entire... I said this, I think, in my commentary, but I clearly think that someone was watching Beetlejuice and we want to worm that size that can swallow someone, like a sandworm.
I think it's a nice little bit of continuity from Resident Evil 3, because it was obviously a secondary infectant in that, and they used the data from that one to try and create a B.O.W, and I think it was used for training battles against the anti-bow squads that were training on the island as well. So it's a nice little bit of continuity with Resident Evil 3, I think.
In Hunk's file as well, it's mentioned, isn't it? He reminisces about the times he was training there and stuff, and so that links in.
My only question is about where it was kept originally. Like, there's no place.
I think when you enter the military training facility, you're greeted with a number of options, and you inevitably go up the stairs. I think is one of the first places you go to have a look at, and then you see a survivor. That's caused loads of debates as you go into that room and then the survivor's banging on the window. What kills it?
Bandersnatch hand.
Yeah, Bandersnatch.
It's a Bandersnatch hand. There's a shutter door at the back, so it could disappear at the back. I've always assumed that that's the shutter door to the one that, oh my god, Alfred releases that you fight, the first one you ever see. It's that same shutter door in the opposite side.
Yeah.
Ah, could
You
be.
can clearly see the hand grab the top of his head.
You can't on PlayStation 2. Lots you can't see. For years I thought it was just the albinos, because obviously that's the only place you fight them, in that room. But
As I was saying, the one that Alfred releases is the shutter door at the back of the room, leads to the back of those big open crate areas in the back where you fight the first one. It's that same shutter door.
I must say, even back in the day, that was always a disappointing effect, the blood. You know, even back in the Dreamcast, it never looked good. One thing we'll just get out of the way quickly is Code Veronica is notoriously pared down in violence. I think it's unanimous across all versions, isn't there? There's no decapitations or anything like that.
There's a story behind that. As you may remember, there wasn't a rating system in Japan at the time. And so at that point, Capcom was feeling the pinch of the industry to kind of self-regulate. It's the same reason why there's changes to Resident Evil 3, and it wasn't until Remake and Zero really came out that the Zero system had kind of been implemented, and Capcom was able to kind of release two versions or stop self-censoring. But Code Veronica, early versions of Code Veronica still had decaps and blood and so forth, and there's some evidence of it in some of the trailers. You can see zombies' arms falling off in screenshots, and clearly also when you use the Magnum or the shotgun, you can hear the pop sound of the head, and the blood splatter, get brain matter splatter as well, but the head stays attached. And that was just them removing the animation. Simple as that.
That little scene with the Bandersnatch smashing the researcher's head again, it's just one example. I think you get more than any other Resident Evil game, certainly prior to Code Veronica. You just get these additional, kind of sort of mini cutscenes that just, in certain sections that do suffer from maybe being a bit bland, really kind of emphasize and set the scene of the atmosphere and the tension. You get many more than you do in Resident Evil 2 or 3, certainly. Well, you get a file where you see the salamander on the little video screen, and it's just kind of like a little projection file. You get just so many kind of these like additional kind of displays and presentations that for me just lift the game up.
The other part about that, George, is somewhat can be missable if you don't go exploring. Like you can completely play the game without getting the scene we're talking about with the researcher if you just don't go up there before you have to go up there to get access to the room. Which you can easily do. You don't have to go up there. Well, no, you have to go up there eventually because you have to go up and solve the puzzle at the back. But if you don't go there when you first arrive there, you won't see that cutscene, because when you go get the bow gun that time, after you've already fought the Bandersnatch, the guy's already dead. You don't see it.
Did everybody on the recent playthrough go to the training facility first, or do you head up to the palace first?
Palace first.
Yeah, I do, because you may as well go to the palace, get the wheel, and then get the card. Biohazard card.
I find that Biohazard warning really annoying, though, that little buzz.
Oh god, yeah.
It doesn't stop.
I guess that's true. It's doing its job. Like you don't want to stay there. Like,
and interestingly, that's the same noise and warning alarm that should trigger Nemesis from Survivor too. So there we go. They reuse that. There's a couple of examples of the zapping system as well, isn't there? That you can unlock a little drawer for Chris to get to later, which I annoyingly forgot.
There's all sorts of things. It depends on, obviously, if you've got the lockpick or not at that point, if you've gone and seen Rodrigo and swapped out the lighter. But yeah, it's telling to me. I was thinking about this as playing through. I was like, Code Veronica does the zapping system better than the remake did. And I was like, how is this? Like, how do they think this through? Because you've got stuff like drawers that you can unlock for a character, or you can set up the detonator in the Antarctic section. There's weapons you can leave for other characters. There's obviously like the extinguisher. If you bring the extinguisher earlier, then it solves somewhat better something for later on. Like, yeah, it's interesting in that regard.
Little optional areas as well that you don't have to go to, which are like the sauna and the little pool.
Yep.
To get the key with the tag.
Key with the tag, yeah.
Some of the small details, like the squeaky air fans as you're wandering around. I think it's the changing rooms, isn't it, for the sauna room? You know, that whole area
with the Valentino Rosso coffee machine.
Very good.
Rossi, Valentino Rossi, isn't he a motorcyclist?
Sure, and I feel bad. That was nearly a quiz question.
Speaking of the water, do you guys have a preference on the original water, which obviously has like a repeat texture issue and the water doesn't look quite right, but it did have a very nifty at the time ripple effect when you walk through it, which isn't present in the HD versions. They just completely redid the water.
The water texture is completely redone. Personally, I like the translucent water because it makes sense in the modern version for what an enclosed space like that little would have been. But yeah, the missing thing is a bit of a shame. And also the water pouring out from the lion's mouth into there as well has ripples coming off it that doesn't have in there.
I didn't know there was that change. That's interesting.
It's an actual 3D effect. As you walk through the water, it creates a 3D ripple. It's just completely missing in the HD version.
Because they were manipulating the texture to make it look like a ripple effect.
Another update in this area, which I'm sure you'll comment, obviously the zombies have changed a bit, and a lot are wearing hats. And we are a big fan of hats on enemies on the Resident Evil podcast.
I have to admit there right now, I do like hitting a zombie with a particular weapon or whatever, and their hat goes flying off backwards. I do have to admit, I do enjoy
their
that.
little logos on the hat as well, the umbrella logo.
Yeah, umbrella logo.
Yes, you fuckers, this is where it all started.
But it's a lovely little detail, isn't it? Because you
is,
can just see it flying off. Oh, what's that? And then equally later in the game, when you encounter the kind of Wesker zombies and they're kind of wandering around, they've still got their kind of infrared scope eyes on, haven't they? And that texture looks very good.
Now, what are you talking about? I've read fan theories on the internet which say that they're infected with the same thing as the Wesker virus. That's why their eyes glow.
You're joking.
No, I do remember reading somewhere that Wesker's soldiers, are they infected with the same virus as him because they have glowing eyes?
I've definitely seen that too.
Those are my favourite across the entire series. Something gets me. I just love the effect you get from glowing eyes.
I think it looks great.
Well,
it's like a trail, isn't it, as it follows?
Yeah, like you say, the trail, yeah.
This is where you get trapped in what is later kind of dubbed as the kind of Game of Oblivion.
Welcome, Claire. Consider the area you are in a special playground I have prepared just for you. Please try and keep me amused, and do not disappoint me by dying too soon. I so want to enjoy this.
You're introduced to Alfred with his sniper rifle, his terrible aiming. And
again, if you've gone to the residence, you'll get the cutscene with him beforehand up on the balcony in the residence when you first meet him. I wanted to point out, this has always bugged me, but apparently his actual name is Alfred Ashford.
He says that I was going to say, I'm not sure if it's a mistake. Alfred
Ashford, yeah. I always thought that was always bugged the hell out of me.
Does he? I never noticed that.
Yeah. You go back and listen to it. He says, I am Alfred Ashford.
One of my first major moments in this game of going, oh my god, was oddly the lift in the game, going up and down a level. It blew my mind. I just thought, this is incredible.
In what way? Sorry.
Because normally in the lifts, when you get in a lift in Resident Evil, it's just open the door, you're in a fixed room, you turn around and go, bing, up it goes. This time it's like, which level? And then the whole screen moves as you go up and down, and the light coming through the gates. I was like, wow. This is great. This is just such a progression from what they were.
Mind.
It was. Because, as you said, although backgrounds, they're not pre-rendered and so forth, it still kind of felt very similar. Whereas this was like, well, this is...
Can I just quickly go into everyone? When was the first time you played this? I can tell Sean played the Dreamcast version when it came out. I played the Dreamcast version when it came out.
I played this when it came out on PS2, so it was
2001.
September 2001, yeah.
You guys will maybe know if I've got my timing right. I'd first played 2 and 3 when it was ported to the GameCube, when they both came out on the same day. And I remember people complaining they were $19.99 each. They both came out on the same day, and I'm pretty sure at that time Code Veronica wasn't available on the GameCube.
I think it came out after.
It was a delayed release.
Yeah, some months later, I was in Bristol, and it came out, and they had one copy in a shop in Bath. And my wife at the time was furious with me because I drove all the way to Bath just to get a video game. But I just remember that's the thing. I was so excited to play another installment in this series that I hadn't played yet. And so playing it on the GameCube was the first time.
Yeah. It's the same for me. It has such a nostalgic feel for me because the PlayStation 2 was the first console that I had bought myself and saved up for money to buy, as opposed to like a Christmas present. And apart from getting Gran Turismo 3, which came with the console, this was the first game that I bought, and of course we got Wesker's report with it, which made it equally as awesome. Yeah, so I have very loving views and memories of this game. But yeah, the lift, it was the moment I was like, wow, this is so cool. As the whole screen just went up and down, I just thought that's incredible. But there we go.
Yeah, just to confirm, the release of Code Veronica was much later on the GameCube. I'd completely forgotten this myself.
Yeah, I remember it was massively late. It was a long time later.
Yeah, in Japan it was August. The early ones from 2003. The US version was December, and I think the PAL version similarly was not until March of 2004.
Wow.
Actually, so it took a long time to come to the game.
How do you think the interpretation of Alfred has aged over the years?
I don't think
Not
it's as
well.
bad. I don't know.
It probably wouldn't go down well now, and especially clear line, Alfred, you cross-dressing freak.
Yes, I love the fact that Steve is kind of he's battled B.O.Ws and all sorts of things, but then for him, like the final story, he almost says it. That's the final story is when he discovers.
I do like that. Like,
yeah.
What the hell just happened? And then like it clicks, and he's just like, "That's it, I'm out of here."
Yeah. I can deal with B.O.Ws, gender fluidity. I'm out of here.
I think you could still definitely do it if you played up, because obviously it's got these psycho illusions. If you played up the psychosis part more and you put it as a character of psychosis rather than actual cross-dressing, if you had to, you would take that term out, and if you just put it as like what it actually represents, then it would be playable, but it's a fine line to cross. Something they could get away with 20 years ago that perhaps wouldn't go down so well these days.
I remember at the time back in the day, and I think it's I still think it's an interesting scene now. It feels like the first time you're actually getting like a commentary and a narrative on the history of Umbrella. That first scene, it always stood out to me that this is the first time we're actually seeing someone relatively high up. I'm not implying that Alfred's high up, but you know what I mean in terms of the characters that we've dealt with.
Had an importance. Yeah. Was it my father or grandfather? I forget. It's like one of the founders of Umbrella Inc.
Which I believe was a series first as well, it being called Umbrella Inc. in this game.
I think so, yeah.
And you get that in the files as well, don't you?
Yeah, there's a few series first in this game, and obviously we'll get to it later, but this was the first game that mentioned Progenitor and Spencer.
Officially in game, yeah.
Oh.
We'd never had a Spencer mention.
We knew about Spencer just simply because of the stuff that had been cut from the original game, which by then had come out. I think it was the book that came with the Saturn version. I think it was Trevor's notes and all that sort of stuff.
Which is a true story behind Biohazard or something.
Yes, yeah. And that had actually been semi-translated, and the information had reached Western audiences a little. If you were invested in the lore at that point, people knew about it. But I'd say the general game-playing base would have never heard of him until this game. Yeah, it's the first time.
Was there not a mention of Spencer in Survivor?
No.
There was. Yeah, there is.
Is there?
Is there?
Yeah. One of Nikolai's reports mentions the
does.
Lord
oh my
Spencer.
God, yeah, God.
Well, Sean, I'll give you that because these came out a week apart. More people would have played Code Veronica first, like just simply they were waiting for that over Survivor. That were fans. I will give you that. It's very close.
But I like Sean's point about the history, and you get that, don't you? In terms of the butler, his almost commentary on what it's been like to see Alfred grow up and pressure on him growing up, and how he almost lost his sanity. And if anyone that listens to this podcast could email us in the name of the film, because I know in the 1980s there was some American kind of straight-to-TV movie which involved an artist whose sister had died, and he was obsessed with his sister who had died, and he was dressing up as her, and a female researcher that came to interview this artist, he was a sculptor, and it was kind of, she was the protagonist, and you were seeing his madness through her eyes, and she would look at this other residence that was on the estate and see this ghostly figure of a woman. I was thinking of that when Batman mentioned about how you see that in the Dark Side Chronicles version. And and you think it's his sister, but actually you find out there's a scene at the end where you see him in it dressed up as his sister with the lipstick on, and it's very creepy. And then you find actually one of his sculptures crashes to the floor, and his dead sister's skeleton is in the sculpture. But there's that huge connection. So I just wonder, I can't think of the name from the 80s.
There's definitely lots of those sorts of things they've taken inspiration from.
I really like that little save room that you're trapped in. The kind of TV in the corner, kind of static TV, gives off a nice kind of audio atmosphere.
With our little buddy D.I.J.
Yes. I don't know. But I can see why that part of the facility is quite bland at that point.
When he's taunting you over the speaker box with that maniacal laugh.
Yes.
I do love that laugh.
His voice really goes somewhere in that scene, doesn't it?
Yeah. I love that laugh.
The save room next to that is where the Nemesis arrives in Survivor 2.
Oh, is it? Oh, brilliant. Okay.
Yeah, he bursts through the ceiling in that room.
That introduces us to the Bandersnatchers, and I'm going to say it now. Easily the most toughest standard enemy in the original class, in the original kind of games.
For me, the Bandersnatch
Hunters in the original, Nick. Come on.
Yeah, I was still with Hunters in the original.
But they're later game. I mean, not this early on.
They were never going to beat the Hunters, were they? And almost for me, the Bandersnatches kind of sum up this game in the terms of they're kind of left field, and they were just trying to do different with them, weren't they? And I love the design, and it doesn't quite work, does it? But
I still don't have, after all these years, a legitimate strategy to fight them. I always tend to take damage when I'm trying to get like the eagle plate. I try and keep my distance unless you use explosive bolts.
Yeah, that's the best.
I know a decent tactic for avoiding them, but I don't know a decent tactic for attacking them because they're so unpredictable. Like they can either hit you from a distance, but at the same time they may decide not to hit from you from a distance, but instead lurch past you and grab the wall and then pull themselves over and attack you closer, and you never know when that's going to happen.
Once you get the grenade launcher, it almost makes it too easy. It's a shame. You just 2 shots of the grenade launcher and sends them down, so you can kind of just do that.
Sometimes it's 1 even, if you're really up close.
I think Code Veronica is a much harder game in these early stages, just simply because you don't have the arsenal at the time. Once your arsenal starts to expand, it gets ridiculously easy by the end.
Yeah. The Bandersnatch is funny enough. The easiest way when you're running to avoid them is to go on the side that their actual arm is on, because they can't, when they swipe at you, they take so long that they swipe past you. So it's very easy to avoid them if you run straight at them and then dodge to their right, because the arm can't hit you. The most annoying thing about the Bandersnatches, though, is they can kill you from caution if they grab you.
Yeah.
Sometimes. I was doing an early run and I was doing fine and the game was sweet and I was doing good, and then I went into a room and I just happened to have been hit by something beforehand, had only just got onto yellow caution, ran into a room, Bandersnatch grabbed me by the head, popped me.
Yeah.
And I was like, where the hell did that come from?
Now, Bats, the Bandersnatches are part of the Tyrant program, but we're not given a lot of information about how or why or...
They were just a cheap version, obviously. There was no attempt to make them human-looking. Again, they were just used for soldier training on the island, and obviously because they were cheap variants based on Tyrants, they had lots of defects, like obviously the missing one arm. They're quite slow moving.
Is there a file, John, somewhere that states why that arm was stunted?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it was just one of the arms was missing just because it was very cheap and it had lots of defects on purpose because it was manufactured as a training opponent rather than a B.O.W. But obviously its other arm with its ability to flex sort of compensated for that. It's possibly another throwback to, or I should say, I know this came out before Outbreak, but Outbreak is set earlier in retrospect, and you have the Thanatos Tyrant it loses one of its arms and compensates by making the other one flexible in a similar kind of manner.
Do we know how they're created at all? Because at that point, mass production, I mean, obviously mass production was around, but what did they use? Sheena Island clones, or?
Well, I presume it was a single unique subject. I don't think it was a T103 clone or anything like that. I think it was just a single subject they tried to make into a Tyrant, but obviously they didn't bother, performing strengthening surgeries and stuff like that on to make them into a proper Tyrant, because obviously this was just a cheap alternative to see what they could come up with.
Perhaps a bit like the Pluto then, in that sense?
Yeah.
That's not the B.O.W. that Hunk's transporting. Perhaps that was a Tyrant.
That was the T-078, yeah.
Yeah, Kat asked that question on her Code Veronica stream the other day, and a lot of people didn't actually think it was the Tyrant, which I thought was really interesting, because to me it's very clear it's the Tyrant.
The interesting to me is where these are all stored, because obviously later on we see where the Tyrant is, and there's a couple other capsules on there. Obviously one of them does have one of these in it, because it's Chris. So I don't know where the rest of them are stored on the island. We obviously never see that.
No, there's only four spaces, isn't there?
There's obviously the one that was in the lab upstairs that we talked about earlier that obviously breaks out, and then that one downstairs, and then the rest of them.
The Bandersnatch moment, of course, leads to us taking control of Steve. Inspired, no doubt, by films. He has his starring moment, jumping through the window and going gun-ho on a Bandersnatch, bit of melee.
Are you implying this is the beginning of Project Alice, that scene?
I don't know. It was perhaps a bit of inspiration.
I think you implied it was the opening cutscene that maybe.
Something I recently found out. When you're playing as Steve, if you go back to Claire,
you get a nice moment. I did it this time.
They attached a trophy to the PS3
and
PS4, an achievement for that, which is like encouragement from the lady or something.
It's 4 different things, she says.
Oh, is there?
If you keep going back, she says you've got plenty of ammo. Don't worry about that. And then it's like, oh, do you need help from me? That kind of, and she gets quite condescending.
It's the same when you play Steve, depending on what you do, you get a different cutscene at the end. So if you go through and don't kill anything, he talks about trying to conserve ammo, and if you kill everything, he's like, this area is now being cleaned. or something like that.
It was dirty work.
It was dirty work. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. It's
Clean.
now being cleaned. Yeah, that's the one.
Steve, maybe rightly so, gets a hard time for his voice, but in terms of a character and what he brings to the story, I mean, I really do love him. And these cutscenes that we get, particularly as he talks about his father, and selling secrets, and it really gives another kind of window into an Umbrella employee and how Umbrella affects not just the people that work for them, but their loved ones around them. And isn't it, I think it's the first time in the series where you get to see a character having to deal with the fact that, obviously you get this a lot in the Walking Dead since, where, a character sees a beloved one that's turned into a zombie. And that cutscene for me is just fantastic. And the story that it brings with it.
Mm. The performance is definitely distracting, yeah.
In the early parts, I find the fact that Steve's annoying up until after that point with his father, I would be okay with. What's more frustrating is that by the time you're on the plane, and this is obviously going ahead, he kind of feels like he's starting to redeem himself as a character. And I'm like, okay, cool. So now he's starting to realize kind of more the gravity of the situation he's in. He's starting to rely on Claire and all this sort of stuff a little bit in moment. But as soon as they land in the Antarctic, he does the whole thing when they fall out of the plane where she offers him the hand up and he dusts her off. And then he starts going back to being cocky and arrogant again. That's like, oh, yeah, okay. So he hasn't really learned anything. It felt like he was starting to grow as a character. No, he's got regressed back to where he was.
And
he's 17.
You're very forgiving, Rombie. Not to mention the fact that he kind of tries to sexually assault Claire.
I wasn't going to mention that until
He is 17. He's obviously infatuated, and he's just trying to impress. I don't need you.
So Steve's 17, and he can fly this giant cargo plane.
He knows how to use weaponry.
Yeah. The weapons thing I could almost understand a little bit. Like I would just be like, maybe his dad was a gun nut and he took him to the gun range. Like maybe he just watched too many action films. I don't know. Like maybe he's just a gun buff. Like he does seem to know what he's talking about when it comes to guns. So and he has a preference for having something fully automatic. Like I can. Okay, cool. That I'm okay with, but like the plane thing just seemed like the one step a little bit too far. Like no discussion is ever made about the fact that he can fly this. It's just like they get in there, he jumps in the cockpit, starts flicking switches, and Claire's like, "I'll leave you to sort this out while I go raise the bridge." Yeah, cool. You'll figure this out.
There's one I mentioned, obviously, on the stream I did previously in the year with the Dreamcast version. In the very original Dreamcast version, the grenade launcher is leant up against a wall. In the X edition, it's put on a box. I assume it's because it's easily missable.
I remember you saying that on your stream.
I remember that too. Funny if you've mentioned that, Sean. Where that grenade launcher is, the doorway that goes through there at the back of that gated area, you can access the area where the lift is. We used to use the flap.
Yeah, I was going to ask about this.
And there's 2 bandersnatches in there each time you go in. Yeah. This is the only time I never realised this until this was the not the playthrough I've done recently, but in 2015, I had never gone in there for some weird reason. Any other version I've ever played until that last time I was playing the PS3 version. And Claire comments on it. You can't go into the room. You can go into the room, but you can't. The slidey doors that go up don't go up.
Yeah,
and it never unlocks.
Can't you?
Yeah, and Claire comments on the fact that that's where the T-virus probably escaped from, which makes sense because there's a giant vent on the wall that's smashed. Yeah. So because I'd always wondered where, like they always said there was a T-virus leak on the island when the island got attacked, and I was always wondering where it came from, and never knew that was the room. So
I was going to ask as well because I think this was the first ever playthrough I actually went that way, and I got mullered by the Bandersnatchers, so I didn't hang around long. I went into that room, got that description. Is there actually any other reason to go that way? Because there's no items, I don't think.
There's a bowgun bolt, which you can pick up as Chris later anyway.
Yeah.
Literally an extra room. And then the only other thing is in the room where you get the other chemical for Chris, there's a locker there with some acid rounds, which once Claire's got the lockpick, you can unlock.
Yes, I did that.
Up, or Chris to pick up later on if you.
Yeah, did people remember to do it?
I did.
Yeah, well done.
I did that one. If you go to that room with Chris, the Bandersnatchers aren't there, but the bowgun rounds are. It's just the other half of the lift, isn't it?
Oh, they're not there because I always go in there as Claire in order to take out those Bandersnatchers.
If you go in with Claire, there's 2 Bandersnatchers, and every time you go back there's always 2 Bandersnatchers, and there's bowgun bolts. If you take the bowgun bolts, they won't be there when Chris goes in that room later on, he comes from the other doorway, which is now it's blocked when you first go in as Claire because it's the one where the lab with the Tyrant is. But then the crates fall over, they block the door that Claire uses, and you can't go through to the basement with Chris. And if you take them as Claire, they'll be gone with Chris. If you don't take them as Claire, they'll be when Chris arrives.
A creepy little scene scene in that room if you take the shotgun shells with Chris? The room where he
Sorry.
says the T-virus leaks.
Yes,
So
sorry.
you get the sweeper, is it?
The sweeper comes out the vent if you pick up the shotgun rounds. That's a
Oh
great
yes, yeah, I love that.
I think it's only if you do it after you've been there the first time, or you pick up the door handle going in the lab. Because if you go in there the first time and just pick up the items and get the Clement mixture from the fridge, you don't get any cutscene at all.
I think it's the triggering of the hunters, though. Which
Yeah,
makes...
it's after the hunters are triggered. Yeah,
If you do that before you trigger the hunters, then you don't get the sweeper. I think I think it's the triggering of the hunters that then trigger. Well, we'll move on to the official residence or palace, which is the next kind of hub area. In my opinion, one of the worst places in the game. I think if there's drab areas, I think this is possibly the drabbest of the drab.
Sorry, wow. Palace.
Yeah, I think it's really boring, especially the main hall, the official residence.
I really like the palace, Nick.
This looks terrible on PlayStation 2 on an HD TV. This is the first point, because all the environments up to this point have been kind of like quite brownish and quite dark, so it looked quite nice and kind of sinister. This is a much lighter area of the game.
And maybe we should be blaming this more on technology change and the quality of the version of the game that you're playing.
Possibly. This is the first time when I was playing I felt that there was a grey filter over the game.
Yeah.
It looked really bad.
The HD version, obviously, because it has like the proper lighting, the main hall has like a lovely green glow that comes off the monitor.
Yeah.
That sort of illuminates the stairs, and there's genuine darkness in like the corners of the room. So I actually think it's hugely atmospheric in the HD version.
Yeah, and the save room. I mean, for me, in Palace is one of the best. And you talk about bland. You compare that save room to say the save room in Resident Evil 2, where you get David's memo. That save room, the
save room's
colours
nice. Yeah, the save room's nice. Yeah.
And the bats as well. You've got bats.
Nick, you've got bats.
Fucking hell, Nick. I thought we were going to have to be fighting this game off Batman, but I tell you what, you're the spy.
I've noticed John is saying as quiet as possible unless he has something important to say, so I think that's sensible.
I agree, Nick, it's shit.
Yeah, apart from it looking awful on my version, but the palace, the first floor of the palace, I don't know. I mean, the Bat's room was fine.
What about the gallery?
Yeah, the one where you need the gold key and do the picture puzzle. I like that room.
Yes, and I can never get that right first time.
The one that gets me is the armory room, which is obviously like everything's like military. There's like guns and naval ships and aircraft, and then there's an ant on the wall. So weird.
That's an allusion to, because Alexia used to call Alfred her loyal soldier ant.
Soldier ant, yeah. But it's so weird that it's like the one thing that just seems so out of place that it is,
I've put here, it's a budget arcade facility, such was my... comment.
It is quite run down, essentially, it looks like. Even before the fighting, I suspect it wasn't particularly...
I did say, going back to your save room, and obviously when you get the gold Lugers eventually off Stephen to go into that room, I think we spoke about, this was a question on the last quiz, wasn't it? When does the lightning come in and that kind of thing? That part was brilliant, because just as you go into the gold Luger room, then the lightning storm strikes outside. That is incredible. Because that, again, if you're doing it in surround sound, that comes out from behind you, and then the kind of bandersnatch jump through.
There's lots of lovely details in these rooms.
Well, that's the thing you say about the room. I noticed that there's about 6 different renders of paintings. So again, if you sort of look past the actual drab walls and the ceilings, and you're right, the individual decoration and the individual items within rooms that do have, maybe drab walls surrounding them, they're fantastic. And again, with the lighter on, that room that Nick talks about is wonderful. But take a moment to look, because you're not just getting the same 2 or 3 repeated renders of different paintings. You're getting about up to 6 different ones. And we didn't mention it before, the puzzle in that room that's a callback to that cutscene between Alexia and Alfred, growing up, and the way they torture that dragonfly. Just so much of that symbolism just goes in this game. As a detractor of the game, John, that must have been a highlight for you in terms of, the themes that they play on between Alfred and Alexia.
Yes, I do like all that sort of stuff, and that cutscene in particular, where they're pulling the wings off the dragonfly, is very effective. It's always been probably one of the most memorable parts of the game, I think.
It's still a creepy little fucking video, though.
It really helps the unsettling atmosphere of the game, because I do think there is a sinister undertone that runs through the game. The fact that they just get a little bit weird between them in that video. And I was just going to say that I think the Palace is home to actually one of the best puzzles in the entire series, with the going through the Ashford lineage. I think that's a wonderful puzzle. It's kind of a nice throwback to the original '96 Journey to Death, and I just think it actually is a puzzle where you have to do a little bit of research. I miss puzzles like that in the series. Are you learning something about the Ashfords while you do it as well?
Go on, what's the order?
No, I never get it right.
To do one each, see if we can get through it. So Veronica's first, I'll go first.
Right, I'll go second. Thomas Ashford.
Stanley.
It's the two twins. Oh, who's the other twin? It's Stanley and...
Arthur.
Thomas, isn't it?
Thomas is the father of the twins, and it's Stanley and Arthur Ashford.
Oh.
The
And then it's
ginger
Edward.
and Alexander.
Then Alfred. Then Alexa. The pressure.
Fully expected you to say Charles Ashford then from Resident Evil. I would have just fucked off if you'd said that.
The final order is Veronica, Stanley, Thomas, Arthur, Edward, Alexander, Alfred, Alexia.
Nick's just literally tearing up his fucking quiz notes and throwing them in the bin.
It's Veronica, Thomas, Stanley, Arthur, Edward, Alexander, Alfred, Alexia.
It would be great if the aspects of that puzzle ran through all of the puzzles that we get in Resident Evil, particularly obviously in 4, 5 and 6, because I really resonated with me what Star said, because something that I really liked about that puzzle and kind of I noticed that made it stand out was that it doesn't give you all the answers. You have to come up with, I think, at least one of those portraits you have to come up with by matter of deduction, by kind of, knowing the answers to a couple of the others, but it doesn't hand it to you on a plate because it's a sort of a matter of deduction, and you have to work out from examining things in the room and looking at where the candlestick is, and so
yeah, that was good.
It was, yeah.
I like the other room in there, the meeting room as well, with that fantastic carpet, that red patterned carpet.
Yeah, that's like a bit like The Shining,
where you get Hunk's report. And that big meeting table, yeah, that was quite cool. You can imagine them having some sort of top secret meeting in there.
The war room. I love also that it's obviously like a place where they come and meet, and they obviously must stay, and they can meet and have these top discussions, and then go upstairs and play some games at their little mini casino.
If one of them wants to go on the piano, they've got to go all the way back to the fucking prison to get the thing.
When you leave the official residence, you get one of the greatest cutscenes in the game, and that nice angle as you walk up to the private residence.
That's also in the original demo that came with Value Plus. That's how the demo ended. That's why I always remember it.
We get to the private residence, and suddenly we all go tubular bells on us with the music. Getting there is a mission in itself. Who was screwed over by the Bandersnatchers? There's like 3, isn't there, within that area?
I think the first time you go, they're not there.
Oh, yeah, it's just when you go back for the 3rd time or whatever.
Well, it's just 2, and by the time it takes the second one to sort of, with his arm, to climb up the stairs, you can actually just...
I gave up. I just ran. But yeah, so the private residence is quite infamous now, because it got quite a bit of a... I'll say makeover in Dark Side Chronicles. They put a different doll statue thing in the middle, and it's a very unique, almost Psycho-esque, but gothic vibe going on.
Yeah.
Again, you're not there for long. There's not huge amounts to explore, but it suddenly takes the feeling, the kind of clues you've been having about, at that point, Alfrexia, if you want to call them that, and that kind of thing, and the weirdness between the siblings. It really up to a notch, and with all the kind of dolls and the doll houses, and you're suddenly going, okay, we are with some proper psychopaths.
It's psychopath, isn't it? Because that whole private residence is basically a manifestation of Alfred's personality. Because if you think about it, the real Alexia Ashford has never ever been in there. So that whole mansion is just based on what Alfred's perception of his sister is, with all the dolls and things.
I never thought of it that way. Yeah.
She's never ever been in there, so that whole mansion is a representation of what Alfred thinks she is. Even though there are certain rooms, like the bedroom, which is a replica from the Antarctic base, of course. But the real Alexia has never ever been in there, which I think is quite interesting in terms of how it looks.
Not as a child.
Private residence wasn't built until 1994 on the island, and obviously Alexia went into cryo-sleep in 1983.
Oh, there we go. That's an interesting way next time.
The real Alexia has never ever been on Rockfort Island, ever.
See, that's the thing. She may have been if there was a previous resident.
Alfred didn't take over the island until 1993.
Yeah, true, yeah.
The doll in the main stairwell is still super creepy. It's a real piece of nightmare imagery.
Is there a point to that little side room where you can light the fire?
You just get ammo in there.
And kill a Bandersnatch.
And an ink ribbon, I think, is at the other side of the room.
Yeah.
There's a couple pieces of ammo, bowgun rounds, and a bullets, and yeah.
I remember getting angry there that I went in there because I'd forgotten that it was pointless. And I dealt a lot of damage to the Bandersnatchers. Oh, Jesus. I was like, oh, it's annoying. And then it can be annoying. At that point, I didn't have the lighter because I would have gone back and given it to Rodrigo.
Oh, you did that early, yeah. So I always do that after I've been to the residence the first time. Because the second time round, the bats are no longer there. They've just replaced it with zombies.
Ah, see, I had all sorts of issues running up the stairs with the bats, and of course I had nothing to protect myself, and I wasn't going to waste ammo on them. But yeah, that was a bit of a pain. You say it's all very... There are options here, John. There's options.
This is the problem, though. I think what you're talking about is options. They put you in a disadvantage because if you don't know what you're supposed to do, you end up worse off for it. And you're supposed to learn from these mistakes, but they're not easy things to... There's so many things to try and remember that you can easily make the same mistakes multiple times. I mean, you saw when I was playing later in the game, I know that I'm supposed to take the extinguisher with Chris to go refill it, and I'd still forget to go and put it in my inventory. Even though I know this, I'll get to the point and then go, I need to go back to the item box. I forgot about it, even though I knew it was coming up. And you can do this. You can easily go, another good example, not to skip ahead again, but if you're in Antarctica, you can force the scene with Steve lifting the crane if you check the panel, or when you come back from getting the valve handle, it just happens automatically. But if you force it to happen because you're exploring, it puts you at a disadvantage that you need to get the gas mask to even go get the valve handle now.
That's what I had to do. Yeah, that was.
Yeah, and whereas you can skip doing that if you just go get it first. So these things exist in the game, and they're more frustrating than they are enjoyable.
That really pissed me off actually.
Exactly.
I was like,
it's a perfect example.
I had to go back twice to get it.
And this bats thing should be the same thing, because clearly you made the decision to go do the thing with Rodrigo early, so to put you at a disadvantage that you don't have the lighter, and they've kept the bats there the first time you visit, so you're now getting attacked. Whereas if you did it in the order that they want you to do it, which would be to do it after you've had the bats, then you would have the lighter. And so, yeah.
And then you would have to get the extra enhancement for the gun. It's not so much giving you a choice of exploration. I think you're right, Rombie. It's more actually just presenting you with frustration. And it is a sign of poor level design. But I think that comes with, I think, the greater ambition that they had with, designing, such a huge and ambitious 3D game. That's it, yeah. The ambition was massive, and they didn't have the logistics planning that they did. If you look at the original Resident Evil, and people have written articles about this, in the gaming environments, like, the idea is that it seems very open, but realistically it always funnels you in a particular direction. But none of those directions ever punish you for choosing them. They all get you to the same way, and you never really get punished for making those choices. But this game doesn't have quite that finesse. It's got the idea, but it doesn't quite have that finesse of order that no matter what you do, you still have an advantage. There's moments where that's lost. The gold eagle plate, which you find, I think, is one of the first items you have to find, and that's in the drawer behind you where you send the email to Steve. And it's a little bit, well, it's not like, some sort of huge sort of wardrobe right in front of you. It doesn't sort of position you towards that. You've got to really go around and search your environment. So I think you do at least know from an early stage that it's a game where you do have to kind of check every nook and cranny. But again, that becomes frustration. Say you're a new player to this. This is the first Resident Evil game you've picked up, and you don't know about the sparkling objects from the past. You literally just know it's an environment, and the game's starting to tell you need to look at everything because, as I said earlier, you missed the knife, you missed this, you missed that. Eventually you get sick of that. You do get frustrated with that entirely, the idea that you have to keep looking at these things. There's a balance to gameplay to enjoyability that is perhaps missing, and I think this adds to that backtracking frustration. There's a lot of weird items in this game. There really is. When you look at the scheme of things, there's a lot of weird items that... Plant pot, door handle. Yeah, glass eye. As John alluded to, the piano roll. We want to play the piano? No, you're going to go back to the prison. Watch out for this dead body in the Iron Maiden. But unfortunately, he had the piano roll at the bottom, so you'll have to open that up. But in order to do that, you have to move a gas crank. And be careful, because that'll release the poison gas. It was that level where it started to get, before it was reachable, that there's these weird traps, and people make jokes about, to get to the bathroom, you have to move the statue, grab the red jewel, burn down that painting, and, there was those jokes. But realistically, Code Veronica is probably the worst offender in that regard of,
I totally agree. It feels like a video game, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There's no sense whatsoever for the piano roll to be there. Not one single bit of sense at all.
Yeah. The other thing is the kind of bedrooms in the private residence and ultimately the Antarctic terminal, so we'll kind of cover two bases here. They had a unique feel with their secret hidden ladders and dolls' rooms and so forth. I know the doors open between them in the...
I like that fact. Well, they do in both, but you don't realise it's a door until after Claire sees Alfred/Alexia use the door.
Yeah.
Then she realizes it's a door. She doesn't know until then, so it's a nice little touch that if you check it beforehand, it's just a feature. But if you go to touch it afterwards, you can use it as a door because you.
I didn't think you could.
Personally, the lowest point of my playthrough, because I'd already been from the prison to the palace to the airport to the training facility to the palace to the prison to the palace. I've got the blue gem and put it on the music box, and it opens up and there's just fucking nothing there. And you go from one place to the other and it always gives you an item to go on to the next bit, and I open it up and there's fucking nothing there. That was where I knew I'd gone to the wrong place, because there's a bit of a cheat, because when you get the piano roll, you automatically think to yourself, well, the logical place to go now is to go back to the palace and put it in. But you have to go back to the training facility to get the silver biohazard card, to get one of the jewels, to then go to the private residence and put in that music box so you can open the other one and get
the other one's in the vase and the puzzle.
But the key to get that is in the training facility.
Yeah, yeah.
They're way overly complicated for what it is. You end up doing a lot of backtracking with a lot of weird items and stuff. So it's
Remind me when you go up the ladder in this one. Does that one that takes you to the carousel, or is that down in?
Yes. That's the carousel one.
That's the carousel.
See,
that's a neat area. I like that.
But again, it belies the idea. This is where people can get confused. John was talking about Alexia not being there. This belies the idea that this is a kids area, and like as if they grew up there, because they'd given them like their own little play area. But obviously that's not the case, because as John pointed out, the dates don't matter. So it's almost like Alfred's more of this even weirder tragic figure where he feels like he didn't have a childhood.
Yeah,
he lost his childhood somewhere.
I'd really like his upper study as well. Who wouldn't want an elevated balcony study like that? That'd be wicked.
It seems like a good idea, but then it would be really annoying to get to, having to climb up 2 ladders.
The final area of Rockfort that we explore is the airport and getting to it. Now, can anyone explain the geography of this airport?
No, I can't even describe the geography of getting to the airport, because as I was saying before, so the stairs that go off the top part, as I said, there's the bridge that's broken. The stairs seem to go down and to the left, but that doesn't make sense for the visuals that you get. They should be to the right of the thing. So, and then it's a closed off area with a pool, because it's not an open. It's a pool, and the sub goes down, and then it's basically just a tank. But the tank is elevated because obviously it's above the water and the rooms below where the airport is. And then the airport must exist in the ravine that you go over in the bridge, but it's not explicitly shown as much.
That must be it. That must be it.
I did like the camera angle though, where you go down in the sub and you're sort of looking through the windows from inside the water pool. That was quite
I do like that too. And the same one when you first, the first one when you first get off the sub, and then the one when you're running around the outside looking from the inside out.
I don't think there's ever been a more welcome side pack in the series as well, for the amount of backtracking and what you need to do.
But the thing about that is it's so easy to overlook.
I know,
people come on the ladder and then they just go straight to the controls. And I remember people complaining. They're like, "Oh, there's so much backtracking on the side." And then I'd be like, I remember this is on the New Blood forums, 2000. I'd be like, "Did you grab the side pack?" And they're like, "What side pack?" But do you know what's funny about the side pack? Have you noticed the little detail on the side pack? Please, Nick, tell me this is not a quiz question.
No, there's no detail on the side pack. No.
Does anyone notice what it says on the little side pack? It says RPD.
Oh. Conspiracies.
This always makes me wonder. It's like, is this a sign that Wesker's already been on the sub and he left this? And it was an old RPG pack of his.
I want to apologise because I had it in my head. I don't know why, thinking about it now, that the sub you take down to the airport is the same one Wesker uses. I thought that because obviously when you have to do your little detour around the island again when Claire raises the bridge for the plane, she obviously takes the sub back down to go back to the plane. And if you want to go that way with Chris, the sub is missing. You can go backwards through it, but the sub's missing, so I thought that's why Wesker took it. But if you actually see the sub at the end of his battle game, it's like 8 times as big.
They did change the artwork though, didn't they? For the X edition.
I think they just added fire, but
they added fire. Yes.
No, I thought the sub does change, doesn't it?
Does it?
I think I'm going to need to check it out. Just bear with.
But that bridge puzzle was stupid. The one later on when you come back as Chris, it's stupid. It's like a bunch of 3s and the 5 to get the oil pressure. It's just so.
Thankfully for all the visuals of the airport, it is made up for the fact that we do get possibly one of the greatest tyrant battles you're ever going to encounter. But it doesn't start off well, ladies and gentlemen. It does not, because we have to backtrack, running theme it seems, to raise the bridge, where we do encounter Mr. Tyrant, who comes to see us. Possibly the easiest tyrant fight.
It feels like a Mr. X battle, to be honest.
Yeah,
I wouldn't even put
you
it
can
that
screw
hard.
it. You can easily screw it up. Like you can.
Yeah, I've died there before.
You think you've knocked him down the first time and this is the usual reaction. He goes down on his knee, and especially if you have played against Mr. X, all of a sudden you've got this idea that maybe you've stunned him enough to just run past, but you can't. He just goes poof with his big club fist.
If you use one of the anti-B.O.W on him, I don't use them on the plane. I'll save it to later. I've got a different technique for him on the plane, but and I don't like that B.O.W thing because just the location, the placement, this kind of really thin corridor, I don't like it for that. It doesn't give you any kind of variation or in terms of how you're going to deal with him, and you've just got the fire behind you, so it's very restrictive. And sometimes well, that plays really well, having the restrictive corridors where you have to dodge the zombies. When it puts you up against a boss battle, it just makes it very dull for me. So I just use one of the B.O.W gas rounds, and then he goes down almost immediately, and then you can just knock him down quite quickly with a couple of normal ones.
Thankfully, though, he does come back with a vengeance, because they build him up quite nicely. You would have read the files if he worked out as Tyrant, and then you get the cool video of him coming out of an icicle capsule, and then
I love when he smashes the fence out and the fence goes flying and it hits the wall and flicks off. I just love that animation. It's such a great moment.
Detail, isn't it? Yeah.
But certainly the actual aeroplane battle is one of the greatest. There are tactics which I think Kat alluded to in her.
Kat taught me a tactic which is use 3 biogas rounds on the plane and then 3 acid. Literally stand in place and just fire them, and then launch the catapult and it kills it straight away. I tried that and confirmed it works. I did not even move through the fight at all.
Awesome.
Very good. Yeah. Normally, I'll be honest, I normally use the left of my explosive darts, believing that's what they're there for. And they're pretty good. I
was going to say, yeah, they're pretty good. I was going to say, but we already know you don't use the gas rounds, which would make it even easier for you.
I do not use the gas rounds, no.
But he knows for future times if he ever plays it again.
I will definitely play again. Yeah. I was saving the explosive darts for Alexia. It's actually a really difficult fight. He killed me at least 4 times, and I have to endure what seems to be the longest FMV cutscene just to get to that point again.
The Tyrant fight, for anyone who's ever done a rocket launcher run, and you don't have like one of these tactics down, the Tyrant plane fight is one of those heart and mouth A rank ruining moments, because one mistake can get you knocked out the plane or something if you're trying to fight it sort of traditionally.
I remember watching a very early video, it must have been like a YouTube video or something, of someone also playing this name, I forgot, someone playing that and ran backwards trying to avoid the Tyrant and ran off the edge of the plane.
Hats off to the writer though. Boss battle location, fucking hell, a Tyrant on the back of a plane with the cargo hatch open. It's fantastic.
The set pieces are epic.
And you've got the 2 variations as well, whether he only just sends him off the edge or if you almost just, send him off the edge. And
he pushes it back,
Yeah, it's great. The first time I was playing it and just like, shit, I have said, oh no, fuck, he's still on there.
And the eagle-eyed amongst you can spot D.I.J. cowering in fear.
He is.
In the corner. In the shelves at the back of the room.
Yeah, it's a nice touch.
I didn't see him. That kind of concludes the Rockfort Island part for Claire, and most of you probably would have thought, well, that's been a decent length game. I think the first time you'll probably be up to at least 6 hours by now. We take evasive action and end up in Antarctica of all places. Again, because it's something that I experienced on this, because it's a lighter area of the game, it really suffers in terms of its visual aesthetic.
Again, that's a PS2 thing.
Yeah.
Watched out, and especially on modern monitors, it's such a white, starky contrast. Even I had that on my I'm playing the PS4 and it's still the same. So
yeah, very grey and dull. And Code Veronica then continues its tradition of having quite annoying enemies with the moths, who can fuck right off.
Can I just make 2 quick points? I mean, yeah, I think that this is the blandest of all the locations, and it really does suffer, particularly with what it served up previous to this. I mean, I think it goes back to good form when you sort of leave kind of and you take over at risk. But this beginning section of Antarctica with Claire, you're right, they are pretty bland locations, and with the moths that have annoyed the fuck out of me over the years, I've now just taken to just shooting them. If you've conserved your ammo up to this point and can concede the fact that they're going to spawn, but you're not going back and forth too much for what you lose in ammo. My God, the frustration that you do without.
But they respawn.
Yeah.
The expenditure of 3 bullets is better than the hassle of being hit, potentially poisoned, or poisoned.
Yes.
Or hit with a little critter on your back, which then poisons you because it never hatches in the same room. It always hatches in a later room, and then you get poisoned. And then, like, the easiest way to get healed is the blue herbs, which are in the room with the moths.
So what's that thing about you only get poisoned if they hatch in a different room?
No, so you get poisoned if you get hit by the dust that they let off. You get poisoned sometimes. I think the percentage is probably like 80% of the time by the little critter if they get on it. You don't always, but it's most of the time.
I don't think I've always been poisoned by the spray either. Rombie.
Yeah, the poison by the spray also doesn't always poison you. And also, the spray poison sometimes doesn't seem to take health off, but the bites do. And if they land on your back, they definitely also take health. It's weird. It's just frustrating, and it's just like George was saying. I just wanted to point out in the cutscenes beforehand, obviously they think they're going to escape, and then the plane diverts because of the water pilot, because of Alfred, who's gotten in the jet by this point. I like the little nod to the fact that obviously he didn't have control just over their plane, but all the planes that they saw take off earlier before they left in the airport, like, have been diverted there as well. Like, the outbreak is caused because of Alfred sending all of the planes there, which I think is a nice touch.
Yeah.
Yeah, they comment on the fact all the other planes that they saw had landed.
It just shows you how quickly it spreads, though, as that there would maybe have been people infected on board already. There would have to have been. But in order to infect the entire area. But then I suppose the confusion would have released. Well, I don't know. Why would there be moths? Where have the moths come from?
It happened very quickly. Yeah, this is where I was going with it.
I mean,
because his body's encased by the moths.
Yeah.
This is the bit. This is where I was going with this. This is the bit that I don't get, though, is the time frame for how this went. It happens very rapidly, and I'm wondering, was there already something going on at the lab beforehand, or did it all happen because of Alfred's impact on trying to get the planes diverted to the Antarctic? Which I assume is the idea it's supposed to be, but it's a bit messy.
How many planes take off?
The planes that they saw took off about 15 minutes before they left, so they're not that far ahead of them too. So even if the time distance of the trip is long, because obviously there's a distance at night or morning to whatever time it is when they arrive, the planes would have only arrived not much longer before them. Yeah. In DOJ's diary, it just says, "I couldn't believe it. The transport landed in a base on the ice Antarctica, and on top of it all, the transport that landed before us spilled tons of the T-virus, and everything alive had already turned into zombies."
Yeah.
So, but the transport that he's talking about is probably the ones that we see, that Claire and Steve see taking off.
We talked about some of the areas already of the terminal. Some weird puzzles and, barcode stickers and God knows what.
The whole gas mask and have to do that whole palaver is because Steve can't take his eyes off Claire's backside.
I've always thought the same thing. It was about Claire's backside, but he actually looks at her back. He looks at the back of her in general. Like, the subjective view is actually looking more at her head. I always thought it was him looking at her ass too, but it wasn't. So.
Clearly the developers of Dark Side Chronicles thought it was her backside. So
I was going to say, this is where it's come from there.
But yeah, there's just annoying things in this with like the valve handle. Then you got to get the octo valve and change it.
Yeah, I was going to say, unless you check the valve, you don't know to change the thing. And
who forgets to make that mental check?
I never now, but I used to.
Yeah. It's so frustrating.
And generally I found Black Widow spiders actually to be much more of a pain than the web spinners, generally because of their size. I think they're quite hard you have to let them get quite close to target them, and they seem to be very resilient towards a lot of gunfire. I'm not sure if there's a specialist weapon that you should use against them. They do a lot of damage as well. They do their kind of face hugger-esque attack on you. They really really drain your health. I like the fact that you cause the giant Black Widow spider to exist, which is quite exciting. And then, of course, Alexia uses it to her advantage later on as a way to try and kill off Chris. What I do like the fact that when you first go to Antarctica, it is completely silent. There is no music at all outside of the save room. I think that's got music, but everywhere else is completely silent until you turn the power back on.
I don't think the save room even has music because you
It
just
might
have
not.
the sound of DIJ rattling the locker.
That's right.
It's a really nice touch, actually.
And I thought that was really nice. And then the lighting improves in it because I can actually see what I'm doing. I've missed so many items on my version.
The lighting's still terrible.
Is it?
It's something that definitely got improved a lot in the MT Framework version, but even the original game, the lighting is not. Even when you've turned the lights on, there's a little bit.
It just uses so much fog in those areas.
Yeah, it's a lot of foggy, which makes sense because it's cold, and there'd be like dense air and stuff. It has a certain atmosphere to it, and I think that's also exacerbated by the sound design. The sound design in there is really good. Everything's got an echoey crispness to it. The zombie sounds, the footsteps, everything has had this kind of right level of reverb in the open areas. It's quite nice.
I mean, let's be honest, the Nosferatu Alexander fight. Oh, blimey. That must have brought some stories. I had totally forgot when it happened. I say that because the game tells you to an extent. It's like, are you ready to go? It's like, yeah. Or you don't have to go, you can go back. I totally forgot that there was no item box before it. So I was ill prepared for Nosferatu. So I had the sniper rifle. I had about 17 handgun bullets.
There's some hidden on the platform as well if you needed the extra.
Yeah. Honestly, I actually considered it hadn't saved, and I was fuming, and it took me 5 attempts to do Nosferatu, and he's an absolute bugger of a boss, he really is, and thankfully I got the cool sniper rifle ending, which I'd never got before.
I came to the recent conclusion on the last time I played it. It's actually easier to kill him if you move closer and do it fast than it is to move further away and try and snipe him. Because if you get closer, I worked this out, if you get closer with the sniper rifle and you do it quickly, you've got a very large target in front of you, very close, that you can zoom in into even a little bit if you want to. If you hit him in the chest, it nulls his attacks because he spins and groans, and if you do that 3 times quickly, he dies straight away. Obviously, with the sniper rifle, it's only 3 shots.
Yeah.
I wish I'd realised this a lot earlier.
No. And of course, you can't heal yourself in terms of poison.
If you get poisoned, you can't see what your health is other than the physical representation of how you walk. I actually prefer getting poisoned, not for that reason, but it makes the run Chris later on easier for me, like the actual path I take. But if you don't get poisoned, it's not the end of the world.
How did you get on Batman?
I used all my explosive bow gun rounds on him, so the fight was over in about 15 seconds. Because you get such a good range with the bow gun, you can stay well away from him, and his poison can't get to you. And then I think I used 1 shot from the sniper rifle, and I got that nice little cutscene just to finish him off.
Very good. Stars, I think you did something a bit different.
Well, I had about 9 deaths against him, or 9 retries, because I thought I was going to make it my mission to get the knife kill, which I've never ever done before. Jesus, I wouldn't recommend it, because the thing is, you can kill him with the knife and not trigger the cutscene. So I'd actually wore him down with basically, my weapons. I got 2 crits with the sniper rifle, hit him a few more times, so it sort of recoils in pain one more time, and then you're set up. But at that point, sort of any hit from the knife will kill him unless you need to make him basically do the same animation he does if you get a sniper rifle bullet. And to do that, you've got to stand as a reasonable distance away, do a kind of upward slash, so the last hit of the knife will hit his heart, and then you trigger it. I died a couple of times, don't get me wrong, got knocked off the roof a couple of times, but some of those attempts were also where I actually killed him traditionally and then had to reload, but I did it in the end. I wish it was one of those moments I wish I was streaming it so people could see it, but I have actually done it, and it is a cool little sequence. It's a variation of the sniper rifle death. Claire says the same line, "I have you now," but she just sort of lunges low and then just stabbed him straight in the heart.
I remember to go back to the save room before I pick up the sniper rifle, and I just dump almost everything in there for Chris, so he's got loads of cool stuff and ammunition and weaponry, and I just go up there, so with the sniper rifle and just her gun, nothing else, because as Rombie says, you get a health item and some extra bullets up there. Yeah, I've never had that extra cutscene. I don't even think I've seen it actually on YouTube. I just take him out with the sniper rifle, but I'm obviously not very good because I use up all the bullets and still then need to do a round of about 15 bullet shots for him to die. And even on my last playthrough, I had to, after all that, a couple of knife rounds. So in order to get that cutscene, you've got to hit him directly in the heart 3 times. Yeah,
for the sniper one, and then as Sean said, for the knife as well.
I've got that thing where you hit him once in the heart, and he staggers backwards. Not enough to actually trigger a cutscene.
And again, it's slightly different. We've not really had a boss fight like that, with the kind of poison elements kind of creeping in, along with obviously quite strong physical attacks where you can be knocked off the building and be beaten up by his kind of skeletal arm as well. So
for me, again, for what he is, the history, how we learn that he comes about, where we find him locked up, in a file, it's alluded to him, the moaning that we hear, and then his character design. You just said the attacks, the different variations that he unleashes, the specialized weapon that you use, and the extra cutscene. For me, that really lifts it up above. Is there anything that can kind of tick all those boxes in Resident Evil 2 or 3?
That kind of ends Claire's game, and just as you're speeding off to safety, you get a very nice FMV of Alfred finally succumbing to his many times he probably should have died. He seems to have quite superhuman resilience to being shot, fallen down a cliff, and is still able to crawl his way quite significantly, if you look how far he actually has to have come to get to the lab to awaken Alexia, just so that she can be...
Does he awaken her, or does she just conveniently wake up? Because he seems genuinely surprised that she's awake.
Yeah,
that's the point.
Confusing. Coincidence, I think, but yeah,
it's such a coincidence. To be fair, and I'm going to backtrack this entire thing around coincidence. There's a lot of coincidence of things in this game. Like if you look right at the start of the game, the truck that crashed through the wall that's on fire, that sparks on fire, that has the case, that has the alloy that Claire actually needs to be able to get the crest, to get the game is built around all of this. I can't really complain again, but it does add to that video gamey element a lot more of convenience.
I know large tentacles that cover the expanse of ice quicker than anything ever aside, I do think that sequence is one of the best ever directed in the series in terms of the music and how it's put together.
I'd entirely agree. I think it's very good, and it leads on very nicely to the next part.
I didn't expect to find another living person left on this island. Who are you?
I came here looking for a certain girl.
A girl?
Have you seen anyone named Claire Redfield?
Did you just say Claire?
You know who she is, don't you?
Don't worry about her. I helped her escape. Several planes took off from this island not long ago. While I can't say for certain, she was probably on one of them.
I see. I guess my sister owes you. Thanks for helping her.
Everyone's gone. I may be the only other person left. Go on. Follow your sister and get off this island.
What an entrance from Mr. Chris Redfield. Before we delve into his shenanigans on Rockfort Island, can we all just take a moment to appreciate what a kick-ass entry that is for Chris? Climbing up the cliff, action music blaring out.
And then he drops his packed lunch.
And his samurai edge.
Is that your theory, or is that true?
Well, I mean, if they ever did a remake, you'd know they would put his samurai edge in it. But it's a nice little fan theory, as you to wonder where it's gone. Yeah, Chris has a Glock 17, which looks like the same pistol that Jill now has in her remake, which is a nice bit of continuity, if you like.
I'm always just assuming that years later, when he's punching that boulder, he's always like, damn, that bloody cliff free. I'm going to get my revenge on all the rocks.
It was a nice touch how he had his STARS uniform on. I thought it was nice. Tribute to his fallen colleagues.
Is there a law thing that it's like a prototype uniform?
Yeah, it was supposed to be the new uniform, and he was trialling it when everything went to shit in Raccoon City, and he wore it in Code Veronica as a tribute to all his fallen comrades, which I thought was a nice touch.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I missed that, Chris.
So he arrives on Rockfort. I mean, we've obviously spoken about quite a lot of the areas, but Chris gets to see some slightly new, different areas, and he first encounters Rodrigo. He has a very different attitude to Rodrigo, and he just sees him as the Umbrella employee that, of course, Rodrigo is. We've known him in the game a bit more sympathetic, and he helps Claire out, but, you know, Chris ain't taking no shit from this man. Where the hell is my sister?
But that's a good point, because we do sort of, he's quite beloved, Rodrigo. And I was thinking whilst playing the game that I liked kind of slightly more sort of larger role than some of the other NPCs, and the fact that we get to see him again as Chris. But take a moment, you know, to think, what was he doing just prior to that, you know, torturing innocent people? And yeah, no, it's a quite serious point that, yeah, he was an Umbrella employee.
I'd be very interested to know, there was an original design to have him involved a lot more and actually have him playable character possibly in the earlier design concepts for the game. And so there was going to be this whole thing about the history of his family to make him more sympathetic and like people in the island. And there's still only hints about it in the final game. It's such a shame. It kind of would have kind of enriched the character even more than what we do get with the glimpses we get, which is just really more towards the actual playable character.
Because he's sat at the gravestones, well, the graves of his parents, isn't he?
Yeah. And this, the only comments you get if you search for Chris kind of notes that they seem to be like ancestors of people from the island and so forth.
Yeah.
When I first saw it, I thought he was originally just going there because he was trying to escape because it was, you know, it was going to lead to the cliff, and he kind of got there and that was as far as he could go. But obviously he's dying and he knows this, so he's going to where his ancestors came.
It's interesting because you would have thought he might wanted to have, you know, you'd think he wants to die, but presumably he's been bitten. Do we know, or is it injuries caused by the bombing?
But it's never specified. He just has an abdominal injury. That's it.
I've assumed, maybe rightly or wrongly, he was on the truck that crashed into the wall that's on fire and becomes on fire, and he gets out.
Oh yeah.
There's no confirmation of that, rightly or wrongly. It just was an assumption back when I originally played the game.
I kind of got the impression he maybe wasn't dying, he just didn't want to leave the island.
Yeah, he almost seemed like resigned, didn't he? That's how I always felt, as almost like, I don't know, almost regretful that he was even working for Umbrella in the first place. I don't know, almost guilty, and almost like he just deserved, that was his fate that he deserved. Yeah.
There's obviously bleeding out because he wants that medicine, but
I think he did feel guilty working for Umbrella because Umbrella forcibly bought the island, and I think they burnt the village down of the people who lived there. So, you know, he has got a hatred of Umbrella, but because he had no other choice, he ended up working with them. Yeah, he was born on the island, I think, so I think he just didn't want to leave.
And I'll say it's interesting because this is possibly one of the first times, maybe before, say, Resident Evil 7, your first involvement, you've got a boss fight straight off the bat.
Yeah, it's a boss fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did everyone get on? And a question I want to know, can you not do it to save Rodrigo? Because I've always have.
You don't have to save Rodrigo.
Unless you kill the worm, though, does it?
I wasn't sure if there's like an internal timeline whereby he'll be swallowed by the gold worm.
Does the lift not come eventually?
I actually don't know. I've always killed the worm, so... Rob?
Asking me, no, I don't know. I've always killed the worm. I've always wanted the lighter to get the guns, and even the first times I played it, I just thought, oh, boss fight, cool, yeah, okay, I'll take on the worm. The idea is obviously usually you've left supplies in the crate of some description. I guess it must be made, like, I'm going to take an educated guess without having to look that maybe you can, because what happens if you haven't got anything, and well, actually, no, that's not true either. I was going to say, maybe it's because in case you didn't have everything away in your item box that you could possibly use, you've exhausted most of your ammo, and all you've got is literally Chris's knife and whatever like random guns you can find, and they might not be enough to kill it. Yeah, but they would just go, all right, well, that's it. It's tough. You just have to replay the game.
Because what happens if you don't go back as Claire to give the medicine to Rodrigo? Isn't he dead at this point? Would he be dead at this point? Because I've never knocked him.
No, he still appears.
Ah, okay.
The cutscene must be slightly different though, because obviously you won't give Chris the lighter.
I think he still gives him the lighter. I think it's just a generic lighter that you get regardless. I'm pretty sure.
Claire would be able to...
She would still always have the lighter.
She still have the lighter. You wouldn't be able to put it in her item box because it's a key item, a special item, isn't it?
She keeps it, and there's certain things she can do with the lighter, because later on Chris can use it to open, like on Antarctica, there's a cupboard you can use the detonator on, that you can use that. You can either do that straight away with Claire if she's still got the lighter.
but a tough boss actually. I think the Goldworm is quite
bullet
tricky.
sponge.
You say that, Nick, but
I do.
Rob, I watched Rob's stream before I got to do it myself, and it's the first time I've ever seen anybody use the bowgun bolts. And I tried it, and it's just ridiculously easy. Try the bowgun bolts next time.
Let's review this podcast in terms of enemy dispatchment. What's been the overall impression? What's good in this game? So we've now got the Goldworm with explosive bolt gun darts. We've got the Tyrant is pretty good for the Goldworm.
Hunters.
Hunters.
I'll get onto this later, but oh my god, just the problems I've had.
Nick, the simple answer is everything.
Everything.
Literally everything.
John...
I'm not even going to exaggerate that.
Have they overpowered it as a weapon then? Was it not balanced properly, do you think?
I think you're right.
It's super overpowered. But then it's limited. Like, I think the maximum ammo you can get is something like 40 or 50 bolts.
I think
you
it's
find
50,
every single powder, I think it's 50. Which, in theory, is enough to kill, if you space them out sensibly, is enough to kill most of the bosses. Most people don't use it against Alex because they used the sniper rifle.
Yes, what John said, 15 seconds it took him for the bolt gun.
Yeah, and that's it. So it's the range, yeah.
Goldworm, I always just blast it with the AK-47, my weapon of choice for the Goldworm.
Yeah, it's good, doesn't take much either.
Yeah, because I found the AK-47 is a funny weapon. I don't think it's as effective as it could be. Rubbish on the spiders.
Yeah, I was just about to say with the spiders, because I took it out on them at one point thinking an easy. But yeah, crikey, just almost seemed just hardly more effective than the shotgun.
All right, so we've disposed of said Goldworm, we've obtained said lighter, and now we are taking the elevator back to the only one of the rooms that we couldn't get to, one of the doors we couldn't go through.
Sorry, Nick, just to clarify, I just went to go check. You can skip the second Goldworm fight. You just don't get the lighter and submachine gun.
Makes sense.
I've got a funny feeling I did that in 2001.
Of course you did, Nick.
Of course I did.
It's easy to miss that little thing where the submachine guns are hidden, though.
Yeah, so easy, so overlooked if you don't know what it is.
So hitting back into the management training facility area that Chris explores, I like the fact the whole place has gone to hell after the kind of self-destruct system that's kind of blown up, and you've now got a very different path where you went before with Claire. So I found it a lot more linear, very narrow as to which routes you can go, but there's a couple of options to explore, and the first kind of main area that you get to, I want to say a hub point, is the connection between under the tank, that kind of corridor, and the subsequent waterway where you have that moaning zombie and the stairs that go up and down if you put the shotgun. That whole level is the whole kind of new area that you didn't get to explore with Claire.
I always get tangled up at that point with taking the shotgun and too early and then having to put it back. So for this one, I had stocked up that much ammo. I just left the shotgun on the rack until I'd done everything and then picked it up just before I went to get the plane.
I did exactly the same as well. I didn't even open the manhole until literally I had the halberd ready to go. Felt it was a very quick way through it, actually.
Yeah, because otherwise I think you can, in my run through I was loading it up because it just becomes tedious, doesn't it? If you need to get to a particular point and you want to go through the manhole cover, go through the manhole cover, up the lift, which sometimes is broken if after I think you trigger the Wesker encounter, that remains stuck at the top. So you can go up there, around the tank, into the main area, up the small lift where Steve's dad killed, along that thing, down onto the main lift, down into the basement, up the ladder, and then back into the training. It is a absolute mammoth route just to get back to that particular point you want. If you need to get to the kind of water fountain.
The easiest thing to do is if you get the lighter, use the lighter for the submachine guns, just use the submachine guns for pretty much the entire run through Rockfort. Don't even bother with the shotgun until you're leaving, like the guys have done. Pretty much just use the submachine guns and you'll be fine.
I actually find the double hunters in the Goldworm yard fall down really easy to the submachine guns.
I wish I'd known this an hour ago.
But you do have to alternate because your auto aim will get the first one that's closest to you, and then you just have to kind of alternate between them. But it only takes like a few rounds to not actually knock one over, and then you just move to the other one until they're both dead. And if you get a rhythm going, they fall really easily. If you don't kill those two hunters, do the enemies in that yard stay as the hunters, or will they always get replaced by the sweepers later?
They always get replaced.
Yeah,
they always do, do they? Because those sweepers are fucking bastards. They really are.
That is hands down, as far as regular enemy enemies go, the hardest point in the game.
Yeah, I sent a message to you guys in the Facebook chat, across all video games, not just Resident Evil, of all enemies. And today, just repeatedly, no matter how prepared, because I tend to get one that will just jump through the air. I wanted to ask you guys if you feel that these are the hardest hunters across the series. I find on average, maybe the shotgun's not the best. I learned the hard way that shotgun just isn't powerful enough because, even 3 or 4, no way. You've got to do 5, 6 shotguns, and even after about 4, they'll just jump through there and decapitate you. But those psychedelic bastards,
sweepers, yeah.
There's a double-edged answer to that, I think, Paul. By themselves, individually, no. When they're together, maybe, yeah. It's rarely when there's multiples. When there's just one, they're pretty easily dispatched, but it's just the distraction of having multiple ones. That's why that makes that bit with those 2 sweepers so damn hard. Always an element plus 2 enemies kind of tag teaming you. The sweepers can get you down very fast.
And they're on you straight away, aren't they?
Yeah, they run straight at you. I've played through the game with the rocket launcher after I unlocked it just to have a bit of a blast, and he still killed me, even with the rocket launcher, because they're that fast. The other thing with the rocket launcher, you can't aim up or down, so you can't kill dogs, and you can't kill the hunters once they go into the animation where they sweep in close, because they duck below the range of the rocket launcher. So unless you get them before they're running at you, or in the air, which kind of can get sometimes, they're so fast.
Often the shotgun almost just seems to make them angry and hardly does anything. They turn around and just decapitate you. That's why I love you talk about the bow gun explosives, because I'd never done one on a hunter. And one of them where you, as Chris, you go to retrieve the army proofs and you turn off the electricity to get it back, and there's one hunter in that area. And he had repeatedly killed me for almost half an hour, constantly going back. And so I just thought, oh, fuck it. I'm just going to take him out with an explosive bow gun. And it was wonderful. I went in there. This guy's killed me 20 times. And I did one explosive bow gun, and it just sent this guy just flying to that large metallic kind of cabinet. That's by where you turn the electricity off. Just sliding unceremoniously on his belly, just literally across the floor, hits it with his head into that cabinet. It was an embarrassing death for him, and it was wonderful.
It's funny how we all had the same problem at exactly the same point. I mean, I was killed about 3 times by those sweepers. As I said, I thought I was being clever because I knew sweepers were in that point. I thought if I leave the hunters there from the previous go, then it'll just remain as hunters and I'll be alright. But no, alas, not. Well, there's a bit of an elephant in the room when it comes to the hunters. Who brought the hunters? And that brings us nicely on to the return of Mr. Albert Wesker. Something which perhaps isn't as teased in the X version than it is in the normal version, but we do get a nice little scene, which I suppose does technically kind of happen in the original game. You just never see it, with Wesker releasing said hunters, and you see the capsules that they're in and so forth. But kind of Code Veronica steps into the void and shows us exactly how these hunters are transported into the island from HCF. The introduction of Wesker is always a interesting and I'd say divisive point. I mean, most people love Wesker, hence he's come back far too many times, and the rumours still persist he's going to come back again. This was unexpected at the time.
Long time no see, Chris. Wesker? Still alive? What are you doing here? I came for Alexia. Who? An organization hired me to capture her. Wait! You attacked the island! And my sister! You have no idea how much I hate you. You destroyed my plans, so now I've sold my soul to a new organization. Now, die.
So there was a lot of general confusion as to how the hell he came back because he got impaled, but do we think he came back in a successful manner?
From a personal point of view, this game wasn't on my radar at all, really. Even though I loved the first 3, there was just no way I could afford a Dreamcast, so I hadn't really paid any attention to it. And then I saw a screenshot of Wesker with his reptile eyes. He didn't have his sunglasses on, and I thought, that looks like Wesker, but I thought it can't be him because he's obviously dead, and he didn't have his sunglasses on. But that plot point, when it was confirmed that he was coming back, was my sole interest in this game, because I thought, oh, it's actually a recurring villain. This is really cool, and that's what sparked my interest in continuing to follow the series because I knew there was no way at the time I would ever get to play the game for myself. One of my friends eventually got it, and I went round to watch him play it, and all I was really interested in was how the explanation for how Wesker came back, and the vanilla version of the game obviously just doesn't do anything. He just turns up and fucks off, and that's what started my massive disappointment with the game ever since.
Here's the origin story. It's where it all began, everyone.
But I mean, it's an iconic performance, though. I'm sure you'll agree, Sean. The voice.
I enjoyed the performance. I've always said that I found it a little bit too histrionic towards the end. In Resident Evil 5, sort of too over the top. Yeah, I thought it was a good performance.
There's a certain, I'll say charm, but there's a certain arrogance to his voice.
This is what I mean. I think there's a good balance here for the character where he's at this point. That slight against your everyone's favorite DC Douglas, but like DC plays him up like the maniacal supervillain, which I guess he is by the time by 5. But there's a malevolence that's perhaps a little bit too over the top for my liking. This version kind of gets a good balance on.
It's a good point because sometimes I'm critical of that performance, and I fail to take notice. You're right that he has become a far more OP and a far more a kind of exaggerated character by that anyway. So perhaps DC's performance is consistent and good with that. I know Rick Moore in the past has said he based, well, not solely on, but he took inspiration from Shere Khan in Jungle Book. For this.
What I find quite amusing between Chris and Wesker's interactions is that, I mean, obviously Wesker's got the upper hand and he's about to kill him on 2 separate occasions, but he's very easily distracted, isn't he? Any video interruption is, sod you, I need to... Off he goes. He's like, just finish the job, man.
Even with Claire, he kind of distracts himself. He could easily kill her and kind of makes this whole plan about wanting to kill her, and then he's like, no, I'm going to actually wait until your brother gets here, but then of course she escapes before he gets that chance.
I think he fancies Alexia and he's just scared of her because, like you say, without even doing very much, he rushes off. And then even that scene with the Alexia battle, when, he's about to take her off with him, and then suddenly Chris turns up and he's just, I'll leave this one to you, and just buggers off again.
Arguably a bit of a coward.
I am glad he came back, though, because I think the storyline was definitely stronger having that recurring villain in it for all those years.
Yeah, I'm with you, John. I've said the same thing, that, when they killed him off, and sure, that's just what it is. It kind of, they've tried to always invoke something to replace him, and it's never quite been the same, and it becomes these very singular villain kind of things.
So, one of the unique elements of Chris's regime through Rockfort is that, as I said earlier, you kind of explore a couple of new areas, leading to the most epic boss fight of all time, the Albinoid. Everyone loves the Albinoid fight. I mean, it's built up as being the big one. You're not getting off this island until you face this pink electric salamander. And bit of a damp squid, I think we can all safely agree. Not quite how the FMVs and all the teases of the electrical zaps as the plate falls down the river and whatnot. You're all building up to some huge, big open fight with some Gantuan and challenging B.O.W. And in the end, you don't even need to fight him. You just run in, pick up the plate, and run out.
I was going to ask you, Nick, because this is the bit that I was quite shocked at. So you didn't even know you could fight him. You just assumed that you just had to run.
Yeah, I did. I didn't know. I thought he was just something that was getting in my way, and the skill in the boss fight was not to fight him, just to try and time your run perfectly so that you can pick up the plate, because he does sit on it occasionally as he swims around. But no, I didn't know. I thought he was actually impregnable of harm, because he a bit like Morpheus, kind of made like an electrical field around him. So I've never fought him.
And those electrical shocks are quite strong, because I died a couple of times today by just basically thinking, this is going to be quite straightforward, just get in and grab it and run, which is what I normally do. I don't think I've ever taken him out, actually. But I just got unlucky today because, I think 3 of those electrical charges and you're dead.
Also quite strong if he does knock you over too.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got a powerful kind of headbutt charge, isn't he? And if you and it can take a long time to get back up, and especially if you're on danger or something, to then crawl back. I think you get a bit of grace in crawl as long as you get to the edge and then press X. There's a bit of a pause, at least in the PAL version anyway, before you actually then leap up, but you won't get hit.
Oh,
is that an iframe? Am I using the right term? Is that an iframe?
An iframe. I think it's just the setup of the animation. It's true. If you're in the animation of climbing out and the electrical thing happens, you don't get zapped. The thing that'll be interesting as well is the PS2 version. You can't even barely see in the water where it is. You kind of have to either wait for the electrical charge and then kind of lights up and you can see it. And I'm guessing maybe the Dreamcast version was the same because it's using the same textures. But interestingly, on the PS3 version, you can see where it is the whole time because it's got like a translucent effect, so you can run straight for it. It makes it a lot easier to not get damaged, I found, when I originally played it.
Did anyone have any funny stories with the Albinoid, or was it relatively straightforward for everyone on their playthroughs? In terms of B.O.W, I'm guessing it's another training type B.O.W. I mean, it's a salamander of some description, presumably because it's pink. Guessing it's like an axolotl. That's what I researched it as. But there is a file George referred to. It's on a board. Earlier on, you can find.
Yes, the projection, like an image file, yeah.
And it tells you a bit about it.
Yeah, I think it was supposed to be like an infiltration thing, because the infant ones get sent into enemy territory when they're still small and compromise the water supply, and they can send out these huge electrical shocks.
Oh, that's quite cool.
And then obviously when they're growing,
they can grow in something like 10 hours, I think it is.
Yeah.
Are they trying to suggest that salamanders are native though to that part of the world?
I'm sure it says that particular salamander can be found on Rockfort Island. I'm sure it says that.
Well, once you have the eagle plate, you can then remove the halberd. You can then go back to your save room. Before we get to the plane, did everyone do the optional volcano puzzle room thing in the save room to get the gold Luger?
Yes.
Yeah.
That just unlocks Steve, doesn't it, in the battle game? It's a good puzzle, really, actually, because
it's kind of silly. Like, you might as well have just been a pickup item that they'd hidden away rather than the puzzle, because it's not particularly that hard. It's 2, 3, 1, basically.
You got to look at the picture of Rockfort, haven't you, in the island or the volcano island.
To work it out, but yeah, like the draw itself's actually not.
Yeah.
Did anyone get taken out by the zombies with the C4 on the backs?
No.
Thank
God.
Is there an explanation as to why they've got C4 straps?
Probably something to do with Wesker again.
They all tend to be the guys working for Wesker, yeah.
We mentioned earlier how the ones with the red eye trail are pretty cool, but
I love those.
I was just going to say these guys. Like, I always thought about this, not so much now, but I remember when I first played it, I was like, well, we don't see any of the rest of his team alive, and we see a bunch of zombies of the team that arrived. So I'm like, they're pretty useless, like forces guys, if they all just get killed and turn into zombies.
Yeah, I mean the lack of HEF generally is quite, but he's on the phone to people quite a lot, isn't he? He's always having communications, both at the end and at the beginning, but we never know who or where they are.
Men recover Steve's body as well, so there's obviously some running around somewhere.
And the impression you get when you wake up with the bombing is that there's a lot of activity going on. This is a full-scale, attack on the island. It's not some sort of stealth thing. So not even like with Resident Evil 3, where we find some of the mercenary bodies around with files that we can read. It's a shame that we don't see any evidence of the HCF at all.
But again, it's not overtly clear that they're Wesker zombies. Unless you look at the, like a strategy guide or something like that, you may just assume that they are, soldiers from the...
Unless also we were talking about earlier, like people start thinking that the red eyes mean somehow Wesker.
That's true. But we do get a nice scene with Chris going back to his earlier career as being a aircraft pilot and jetting off from Rockfort to go save Claire. Alfred had a spare Harrier jump jet, as one does. They're quite expensive Harrier jump jets, so they're obviously very rich. They're about 100 million each.
Be no expense.
Yeah, they obviously had the spare. Was it underground or something absurd? It was almost like on a lift. As you come in, it just rises up.
Well, there's 2 of them in there, I think, earlier on when you see Alfred using it. You can see there's one in the position where it was, and there was one that was kind of further away, and that's the one that gets kind of pulled out for Chris when he arrives.
So you jet off to Antarctica, and you land in a slightly different area to obviously where Claire lands, but you're quickly into the same part of the Antarctic terminal, where you are initially confronted by tentacles in the wall, and I'm sure everyone thought, well, I can just run past them, and you're quickly, brutally told that no, you cannot. Then you keep trying, and then realise your health is actually going down, and so you're going to have to take them out. And they take a lot, don't they? They take quite a lot of hits.
It's kind of annoying. I think they take like grenade rounds, like a couple each if you use those.
It's one of those things I just wish wasn't in the game. It's one of those fantastical elements that just spoils it, I think.
Well, in many ways, I'm not quite sure what it has to do with an ant. I mean, if you're going off on the idea that Alexia is becoming the queen ant and whatnot, which of course is built out through Ords, and she's got her pod, which is the nest, and there's loads of little ants. You're going, that's all fine. Where the hell does a whacking great tentacle arm suddenly come into it? That's not a natural feature of any ant nest, I know.
Because part of the T. Veronica virus has plant DNA in it as well. The plant has been there along alongside the anthill for 15 years, and as soon as Alexia awakens, she's got symbiosis with it, so she can control it all. And the idea is the plant gives off pheromones, which helps control the ants as well.
Oh, okay. I'll take that back then. Bit more logical.
But you saw how she used that massive tentacle to travel dozens of miles across the snow to get Claire and Steve. It's like she could just use that tentacle to destroy the base, kill Chris as soon as he arrives, that sort of thing. It's just one of those things. I mean, I sort of understand why it's there, but I wish it wasn't there. It's just something that's just not needed. Because
from Alexia's point of view, what's she actually doing now that she's awoken? Why, as you said, obviously she's going to take a bit of revenge on the killing of Alfred, and she captures Steve and Claire. She wants to experiment a bit on Steve. All fine, not a problem with that. What's she waiting for after that point? She obviously works out Chris may be coming, but what's stopping her just starting her world domination plan? Why is she toying? Why is she going, oh look, here's a Black Widow spider, have fun?
The impression I got playing it for the first time was that this was sort of it's how you read her relationship with Alfred, because on the first playthrough I kind of got the impression this was very much revenge for his death. The world around her, as she expected it to be when she came out of her cryogenic sleep, things were quite different. She perhaps expected, certainly, not for the base to be under attack. And so, yes, and I presume, that things were going quite awry in terms of what she expected to find, on her awakening. This was very much a kind of, revenge against the people that have, destroyed her brother, destroyed her island.
Do you ever get the impression from her specifically that that's what she's after? She seems far more grandiose than petty revenge against her brother, who she didn't hold, I don't think, in that high regard.
Well, you definitely got a point in terms of her dialogue, because her dialogue is very limited, and so you get very little.
She's like, you're not worthy of this power, that kind of thing. And well, okay, so exploring onwards with Chris, the first kind of new area you get to explore, and I love the fact that it's all frozen, because it can be easily lost in the final closure of Claire's game, is that the whole place gets flooded because of their drilling. Because it's the Antarctica, because it's absolutely Baltic outside, it all freezes over in it, so it makes perfect sense that main room is now suddenly full of ice, and so it gives off a slightly different feel and environmental elements. And I like the fact that there's that kind of continuity but change at the same time, which obviously you saw a bit earlier in Rockfort. But we see the giant Black Widow, and Alexia is toying with us, and that kind of leads on to other areas and the kind of new lab areas and getting the extinguisher and so forth. And you get to see a lot more of the terminal than you do with Claire. Before we head down into the doldrums, if you like, of the labs again, did anyone have a go at killing said Black Widow spider, or is it just a run to Nosferatu to get the gem and then out again?
I actually avoided the spider, but weirdly I found Claire within 5 minutes of getting to the base, and obviously triggered the Wesker appearance and the Alexa fight, so I'd pretty much done a majority of the game before I even used the crane to get the gem from Alexander's body. It was a really weird way of doing it. I've never done it before. I ignored most of the puzzles and everything else that was optional and just went straight for Claire. Yeah, it was an odd experience. I can't really explain it, because none of the base was powered up. I obviously couldn't get access to the labs, but I was sort of right at the end of the game, if that makes sense, because I'd fought Alexia's second form. Wesker had turned up and left again. Claire had a final encounter with Steve. It was just really odd. I did all that within 10 minutes of arriving at the base, and I suppose it's nice that you have the option to do that, and you can do things in a certain order.
You can do pretty much the entire last section in multiple different. It's all the way you want to go. Basically, by going straight to Claire, you change the order, and then that also changes based on whether or not she was poisoned. If she wasn't poisoned, then you have to do that part, which then means you won't have to leave, which is, I believe, what happened to you, isn't it? She wasn't poisoned, so you went straight to the fight unprepared. Whereas obviously, if she'd been poisoned, you would have left to go get the serum, and at that point you could have gone and done either some of the rest of it, or gone at least got weapons and ready for the fight. So
I remember, Sean, when you did your stream on the Dreamcast version a couple of months ago, you were saying and telling the viewers about how you can speed up the last bit if you do a lot of preparing at the beginning. Before triggering everything, you can kind of just go for it right at the end.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much a variation of what John's just said there. You can do all the prep, because the trigger point for like the end game is the freeing of Claire, and then that leads on to a specific sequence of like Claire and Steve, then Chris versus Alexia and stuff like that. And you can either choose to go and grab the knife, free Claire straight away, and then have all all that to do at the end of the game, or you can do a lot of the prep, get the proofs to open the door. Obviously, you can't open the door until you've killed Alexia, but you can do a lot of like the running around and the hard work. Once you've sort of had the Steve cutscene and the Alexia fight, if you've done all the pre-prep, there's like 10 minutes of the game left. Whereas I imagine, John, you probably had a good chunk of the game left.
I had about another 40 minutes after that. And like you say, it was weird because I was in the end game and I missed out on the Alexia cutscene at the spider because obviously I'd already defeated her by that point. So when I got there, the spider was already loose. Yeah,
we didn't allude to, but did everyone upgrade Chris's handgun?
I didn't. I'd kept the Glock in the item box at the time, so when I got there with the chemicals, I didn't have the gun to upgrade it.
If you're going to upgrade it and you've been putting it in your item box, the time to grab it is when you go down to the seaport, and then when you're coming back up just before our favourite sweepers is when you should grab it, because that's when you go and upgrade it. One enemy that's really random, has anyone gone and had a look at the moth, where the moth zombie was?
No, I don't. I just run through that. I just glass ornament and then leave.
There's a bonus enemy in there that probably most people don't even know about, which is that if you go and visit the moth egg that was laid when you saw Claire, it hatches, and there's this little kind of slightly larger version of the little critter that comes out and bites Claire, attacks you. It's kind of got like 2 claw arms, and it's slightly larger.
I can safely say I did not know that at all.
No, but I've seen that artwork because that's in the archives. It's that little white thing with the hooks, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
I always assumed it was just an incomplete drawing. You could tell it's supposed to be the moth. I was like, oh, they must have just half finished the story, but that's where it comes from. Oh.
So the zombie that was on the top falls down, and one other zombie gets up. And the idea is that the one that gets up is very close to you, so it distracts you, and then the one that's fallen down, the thing basically jumps out like a chest burster and attaches itself to you. And it's worth checking out. So.
Absolutely no idea. See, 20 years later, guys, we're uncovering these little secrets. Well, it's not secrets to everyone, but it certainly was to me. Aside from the deaths I'd received trying to do the knife kill on Alexander, I did die once at the sweepers that we talked about in the Gulp Wormyard, and I just fucked up royally the Alexia fight for the first time in years. I always take the Python in, and she's down in like 5-6 shots, isn't it? I think is it 5?
5 shots, yeah.
5 shots, and I just fucking kept running into her. I don't know what was going on with my controls, or I was just misjudging it so badly. I probably died. It was 2 in a row, and that's probably 2 more times than I have done in the last 10 years. I can't even remember the last time before this playthrough I died on that fight. It was embarrassing. I
did the same thing because, as I said, because I went there really quickly, I was completely unprepared. I didn't have the Colt Python. I had the Glock and the shotgun, and that was it. And I got killed 3 times by her.
Because she's tough, isn't she?
Throws a fire. It doesn't seem to burn away. It just completely boxes you in. And like you say, if she gets close enough, she just picks you up and you're dead straight away.
The music is excellent though for that fight. Oh, it's really good. As a set piece, I think it's a good fight.
It was a good sequence in the original, but when they added the extras for that cutscene, just added a little bit more to it, and it just made it more epic. That Wesker had these powers, and he just basically can't even do any damage, and he wimps out, as Nick alluded to earlier. It's like that made it even better, I think.
There's exquisite characterization between Chris and Wesker as well in that scene. I love how Wesker taunts Chris's by calling him his best man and stuff like that. That was where it all began there, like the real rivalry between them.
At last, I found you, Alexia. Come with me. You're responsible for the creation of the T. Veronica virus. And now the only existing sample is in your body. I want it. Now!
You want it? You are not worthy of its power!
Chris, since you're one of my best men, I'll let you handle this.
In the original scene, Alexia just beats the shit out of him.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a big back slap.
It's interesting that they changed that cutscene, for the remake. I think perhaps presenting, maybe, I don't know if Wesker or maybe even Alexia looked too overpowered in the original. Yeah, they wanted to give Wesker a bit more of a battle. And I was like Batman. I went into that fight with Alexia a little bit unprepared. I just had the Glock and the shotgun, and I really enjoyed that because she seemed to have a lot more variation in her attacks than some of the other boss fights in the other games. And like you say, she can kind of box you in with the fire, and also her attacks, there was kind of a combination, and it just felt a lot of these boss battles in the past have just kind of felt like structured dances where you're just always doing the same routines. Whereas that one with Alexia, it kind of really felt a lot more free moving, kind of random.
So it's worth noting at that point too, when we're talking about that boss fight and the Colt and how easy it is to fire bullets. I mean, this is all based on whether or not you bloody well remembered the fire extinguisher too.
Yes.
So, like most people, the first time they played it, they didn't probably have the fire extinguisher because they didn't know about that. So most people ended up fighting her without the Colt Python. The irony is, we were talking about before with bowgun explosive bolts. I don't think I've ever tried using those against it.
They're bound to be good, aren't they? I think what we also need to mention is the fact of where we're having this fight. We're having it in the Spencer Mansion main hall.
Love it.
A place of safety, normally.
Love it.
A version of it, anyway. Yeah.
A version of it.
Last count, I believe, is there 4 rooms that they've recreated for this game. There's the main hall, there's the L-shaped corridor, there's the living room where Claire starts her final bit, and there is the woman bearing water gallery, isn't there?
That's a great question. I'm trying to think of any more
parallels. If you want to be technically picky, also the little closet with the statue with the red and blue jewels, but it's kind of more of an homage to the actual puzzle than it is to the room itself.
It is interesting though. That's what game 4 of main games, and we're already getting nostalgic.
That blew my mind the first time I played it, because the fact that particularly in like the main hall there, they even replicate the camera angles.
Yes, they do. That's right.
Of the ground floor was just really good. And I mean, I think I found Claire by chance the first time I ever played it, just because I just wanted to do the circuit.
What I like about that too is that they have that, and then they also go, "Oh, look at our new fancy graphics," and we have like the bit where if you walk up the stairs, the camera now follows you up. Like they were definitely showing off the fact that this is like that, but in 3D.
It makes sense that were they ever to remake it, they'll base it on the remake main hall, won't they?
You can still see the face, by the way. There's a little... just a little question. In the water hand, where's whatever lady holding the water, there's a map, isn't there, in the... Can you get that?
Yeah. Oh, Nick.
I've never been...
Really, Nick. Before anyone spoils it, Nick, what do you think you should do? Now that we've told you can do it, what do you think you should do?
I'm guessing you can move the statue. You can put...
This guy's drip feeding this. Is there nothing in the room, Nick, that you've noticed before?
Can you stand on the table?
No.
Anything on the floor? About the floor?
I don't. Honestly, then
Nicholas.
Imagine if you were asked this question at your panel in Portsmouth.
Hey Nick, I'm having this trouble in Code Veronica, and I really want to get that map near the end of the game, and I don't quite know how to do it. Do you know how to do it, Nick?
Nick would throw it in as trivia, saying, "Oh, there's actually an item in Code Veronica that you can't get. It's a curious, it's a curious story.
It's an homage to the original Resident Evil that you can't actually get it, but it looks really much like the same. But for some mysterious reason, you can push it around. I'm not quite sure why.
I'm still. Please,
I want to put him out of his misery.
Please.
The thing is, Nick, I did it in the fucking Dreamcast stream.
Oh, I must have missed that bit. Oh dear. I mean, is it just I assume it is just the map. I wasn't that bothered.
Yeah, it's just the map.
Fine.
So in the corner by the table that you thought you might be able to climb up on, the floor is slightly cracked, and if you check it, you get comment that it's broken and seems quite loose. And if you push the thing on top of it, it just falls down a hole at height for you to grab. So.
Well, there we go. I did not know that. Thank you, gentlemen.
My name's Nick, and I love the puzzles in Resident Evil the most, but I just choose not to do any of them.
To be fair, it is optional if you want the map or not.
And that's what I miss, that we don't get those environmental descriptions anymore in the new games, because you get that, like you say, there's that little clue about not just the floor is broken, but almost this curious little mention as to why would it be like that. Because I mean, Nick got me out of trouble when I spent about 5 or 6 attempts going back and forward to the tiger with the red and the blue jewels, where you have to get the butterfly as Chris, the dragonfly body. And I hadn't turned the electricity off. And so I kept going back and forward with just one. And I mean, you talk about backtracking, Jesus, that really nearly did test and break my love for this game. But then Nick mentions to me, no, you've got to turn the electricity off. Oh, sorry, when you go back to the description of the tiger, there is like that curious description as to, this is being powered. And then you think, why would it have told me that? Of course it's told me that, because it's suggesting,
The number of obtuse items that exist in this game is quite high. And I have to be somewhat also unfair to the puzzles too. Some of them are a little bit obtuse on the point of, if you don't get the clue, then you will miss that. Like, that's a perfect example there, George. Like, it's just, if you didn't notice the power thing, if you weren't really thinking, it could be quite frustrating for the wrong reasons, because you all of a sudden work out, I need to grab that gem for something, and obviously I can put it where, but I can't get both of them. What's going on until you actually click, and you'd be going back and forth 3 or 4 times before you kind of realize it. There's quite a few of those throughout the game.
Just quickly about the identical mansion hall. It's a nice tribute to the first game, fair enough, but it fueled this myth that Umbrella liked to create identical facilities. This sort of is what led to the silly argument that the lab in Zero was just an identical copy of the one in Resident Evil 2 rather than actually being the same lab. And there's a nice little story explanation basically saying that George Trevor did blueprints for the redesign for the House of Ashford in England before he died, and Alexander took those plans and incorporated them into the Antarctic base, which is supposed to explain why some rooms are similar. The designs Trevor did for Edward Ashford are similar but not identical to the ones he did for Spencer, and that's supposed to show the sort of professional rivalry between Edward Ashford and Spencer at that time. So it being identical's got actually nothing to do with Umbrella, and Umbrella don't create identical facilities. That's just a myth. This was purely a personal thing between Edward Ashford and Oswald Spencer.
One of the files actually makes it sound. Is it Alexander or Edward who writes? It's Alexander's, isn't it?
Yeah, he calls it his mansion, doesn't he?
Yeah, but you alluded to him not actually referring to the Spencer mansion, but his private mansion in England.
That's right.
The hunter drones are quite difficult to avoid in some of the places with the labs.
I thought that was quite a good technique, just to slightly detract from feeling such repetition with the backtracking, that you had that mechanic where you had to sneak past the CCTV, as it were, that triggers the hunter. So I quite like that technique. I don't think we ever got that again in a game, did we?
Well, it was interesting because Krauser uses something very similar in Resident Evil 4. He has these like little drones that go after Leon before the fighting in the ruins, and I always thought then it was very similar technology to the drones surveillance things that Wesker uses in this game, and it makes sense because they both work for the same company.
One thing that also surprises me as well is the significance of when you've done the twin room puzzle with the the music plate and whatnot, and you go up the ladder into the what you would call like an attic sort of thing. The significance of that room, I was actually surprised on the stream I did, was lost with a few people, and we all will know this, and I should say most of our listeners do, but for just those that don't, that is actually the room where they pull the wings off the dragonfly and throw it into the, because they even replicate like the camera angle from the movie. It's like a one-time only camera angle.
Oh, wow.
when you stand in front of the tub that they put the dragonfly in, you get the same angle from the movie, the window behind them. And I think it only does it the once.
What a great touch.
Got all the portraits in there, and they've defaced Alexander's portrait, which was a nice touch as well.
Environmental details there. People say it's bland, but it's there.
It is there. It is there. It is there. It just seems a bit of an inconvenience, though. All right, when you go for our board meeting, right, hold on. We need to go into
the music played out of that box. Put these gems in there. Did someone bring the jewels from the tiger downstairs?
Oh damn!
Today?
I didn't.
I only bought the red one. I need to go back down and get them.
I will reiterate what people said earlier, that this game does feel like the most world-breaking of probably all the classics in terms of that kind of thing. The implausibility of the geography and things like that, and the access.
But it does give it a unique charm, and as we're kind of coming to the end of the game, I couldn't help but have a huge smile on my face playing this game. I think it is a culmination of the original trilogy into one big, bloated survival horror kind of pre-rendered. I mean, it's not pre-rendered, but a pre-rendered background type game, and you can't help but like it because it's got so much associated with it. All the RE2-esque noises, voices and sound effects. It's got all the right characters with Claire and Chris combining, and it's got RE3 type B.O.Ws with the hunters and the worms, and you've even got kind of like Nemesis type thing with the Tyrant and stuff. It just ticks so many boxes that you can't help but have a good time. So I do give it a bit of a pass for a lot of the backtracking and stuff.
I suppose it's only fair to ask then, Steve, how many deaths, guys?
I will start proceedings with a bid of 2.
I have to take literally 3 health cans into that meeting. First of all, you've got to obviously immediately do the quick turn. The minute you start running, he gets you immediately, doesn't he? And unless you're fine, I think that's an instant death. I had to use 2 full health ray cans in order to get out of there alive.
Or Robert talked me through the dodge that you can do, where you actually run behind him.
Dangerous.
And then lead him out of the room. It took me 2 attempts to get it right, and I still fucked it up on my successful one and got hit once.
It's possible to get not hit at all. Basically, you run towards him, go behind, face it back the way you need to go, and pause just very briefly. He kind of swings awkwardly as he turns around at you, and then you can run underneath and run straight, basically. And then the time it takes him to get around and get close to you, you can get all the way to the door cutscene. But it's pretty easy to screw it up, to the point now where I just take the 2 hits. It's just easier. I'll just take the health with me. I've usually got an abundance of health. I'll make sure I'm fully healed beforehand, as George very well alluded to. If you're not in full health, you can get killed, and just take the 2 hits.
I can survive the fat T. Veronica lizard with an axe without dying, but can I get a security card out of a glass ball without dying?
Oh, God, I forgot, yes.
Rob, you had a good experience with it. I feel your mind was mentally crushed.
Yeah, I just knew. I wrote in the chat before, and I was like, I just know I'm going to fuck this up. I just know it. I just had this gut feeling. I was like, I can't remember this run, what I'm supposed to do.
I was unaware that it's actually not really on a timer. It's almost like sensitivity. So I'm afraid I just didn't have any issues at all. And I don't know if that's down to PS2 version. I was watching your version. It's hilarious. Because, quite frankly. But in a good way, in an educational way. Because
he had some intricate ways of like running into the cell behind it and then running back across the cell.
Oh, I've been there. Rob.
The way that I understand, so having watched what Sean, once he's rolled the ball out, he runs through and goes and grabs the ball and then triggers the trap, and then by walking under it and walking back, and then puts the ball underneath, which then crushes, and he can immediately go run in and grab the card. Why that works, I don't know. That's just weird. There's no timing situation where that makes sense. So what I found the easiest way for me to do it was to use the pressure plate to basically trigger it. So you've got more time when it's just gone, it seems. So I run through to the cell, which doesn't set it off because you've got that extra bit of time, but not quite long enough to be able to pick up the card, it seems. And then I run back through the second time, which then sets it off. And then if I do a quick turn and quickly run straight over, I've got more than enough time to pick up the card, and then I don't get crushed. And that seems to be legitimately the safest way of doing it, because I never have to put myself at risk. But I'll never forget. And in 5 years' time, when I somehow end up replaying this again for some reason, I'll get crushed again, because that's what always happens.
It's almost like if it's in its like return as it is rising animation, if you actually set the thing properly, it's almost like it pauses it and then resumes it when you're able to move again. So it gives you that extra half second or so.
Well, once you've kind of got out of there and brought everything together, you're ready to face the threat that is Alexia.
The puzzle's neat. I like the way you've got to reassemble the dragonfly.
Yes, you've got to find all the wings, don't you?
I never thought about that. That's clever. Yeah.
It's reverse of the way it worked at Rockfort. Yeah. You saw the video of them pulling the wings off, and you use the body as a key, and then this one you get the body back, and then you put the wings back on, and you use that as a key.
It's almost like you're undoing what they've created, and I kind of like it.
Symbolism. Yeah. And you never told the password is Veronica. I mean, I remember doing it the first time, just guessing.
It's in the security file.
And also the document that you can get with Chris is called the Code Veronica something. I can't remember.
Password's rolled up in the statue in the art room, Nick. That's
That would be why. So you come back into that kind of main area, and you are greeted with Alexia, who's kind of recovered. There was a little teaser scene earlier with her kind of waking up and walking and whatnot, and she's fully healed. Now, people have said, I think in our Discord, people were talking about whether she can go back into human form at that point, whether she was actually going back into full human, or was she just staying in her kind of, let's just call it her tyrant state, for argument's sake.
A lot of the implication for that comes from Steve, because when Steve goes to die, he turns back from this giant monster to almost normal.
Yes, yeah.
that's caused so much problems, in terms of the virology and what's going on there, when really, I'm sure we all agree, it's just a mechanic, isn't it? So that they can have that emotional scene at the end, which probably wouldn't land very well if
he was a giant monster. Yes. I love you, Claire. It'll be.
So what was that, Steve? What was that? Can't understand, Steve.
It's nice to see Claire and Chris together up on that kind of area, and
I thought all the scenes with Chris and Claire are really well handled in this. Even though it had only been 2 years, it felt like we'd been literally waiting years for like that kind of thing to happen. Yeah. Characters actually meeting each other across games was nice. Main characters from 2 different games like united in this one, and I felt this was one of the first series in video games that kind of juggled its characters so well.
The other part that's really important, and we're going back to that symbolism and talking about like the ants and putting the wings back on the dragonfly. The whole thing about this game is siblings. That's a really important key to this whole game. So it pays off well that they were able to round these characters out, believable siblings. Therefore, it gives this counterbalance to the weirdness that is the Ashfords.
And Alexia even kind of comments on that, doesn't she, when she refers to them as genetically inferior siblings.
Yeah. When in the end, when they resolve, they become your peers. They obviously are the superior.
And then you have, of course, the Alexia fight, where my opinion of that changed enormously when someone said, "Bring out the bow gun again."
I knew that was coming.
It's the weapon of choice. It really is. It's 15, I think, and that's it. But we counted it.
You counted it on my stream. It was 6 seconds.
6 seconds, unbelievably quick.
That's what you said.
There is another trick. There's 2 tricks to killing her quick. You could, if you stand right next to the blob and then fire, I think 3 just standard grenade rounds, that kills her.
Wow.
There's definitely 2 quick tricks to killing her. That and the obviously the 6 seconds.
I guess that makes sense because each explosive round's broken up into the shell parts, and they're probably the equivalent of 1 bolt each.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But I assume everyone does it quite quickly now because of that. Since learning that trick, it's just all over.
I remember trying to fight that stage the first time I played the game, like 2000.
It's tricky because of the things that keep jumping on you.
Yeah, and then her swiping these big tentacle things and knocking you over or knocking you down, hitting the ground, and even if you're not being hit, it still shakes you down, off a little bit. So,
and I really like the metamorphosis that she goes under. It makes sense that she's becoming the queen ant, and of course flying ant type scenario where she just then emerges from the blob as this flying B.O.W, something we've never really seen at that point. It's a bit unfortunate actually that we then have to get the linear launcher.
So often the rocket launches.
Exactly.
Let's go with something a little bit different.
It takes a while because she moves so quickly.
It depends because one of the times I've played this, and not in the recent times, but I remember one time I literally just grabbed the launcher and went and aimed it, and she just fired, and it just happened while she flew through. And immediately just oh, cool, she's dead. Okay, cool. Yep, awesome.
First time I ever played it, I hit her first time.
Did you?
Yeah.
It was
director of the cutscenes, I just think did great work because I love like how the music swells and you get the music break and then the linear launcher drops down and like it deploys and you can. I think it's a really masterfully done sequence.
Yeah, I love that little scene of the music hitting that crescendo just as the dials spin out and then it goes kunk as it comes out.
It's just great.
So you take it down, you get a nice video, and then of course the X version then suddenly intercuts with a rather quite lengthy cut with Wesker, the final confrontation between Chris and Wesker. You can see where it's cut quite big. It doesn't make quite a lot of sense suddenly. Chris then kind of running back to the lift. I'm not sure if they flipped the scene to make it more logical because I think he runs past it to get to the ice bit.
No.
They cut the FMV shots and
they cut the FMV shot.
Oh, I see. Do we like the Wesker-Chris confrontation?
I absolutely adored it back in the day. We'll ignore the fact that the timer that you stops miraculously for it, because you only have 5 minutes left to fight Alexia, and their fight scene's like 10 minutes.
You've got to have the classic villain dialogue, don't you?
Yeah.
So,
but I think it's a masterful sequence.
It made Wesker quite grounded as well, compared to, say, how he's in 5. He's a bit of fire at waist height suddenly is a preventative measure to stop him from getting, until next time. I like that and whatnot. And it's like, you could jump over that. We've seen you jump over higher earlier in the game.
Yeah, we've seen you earlier jump over a wall. Yeah, I thought that too. It was just like they needed a way to end it. I do love that bit where he's like, talking about the power that he's gained, and then he just does that massive uppercut to Chris, who sends him flying backwards.
The dialogue's exquisite as well. I mean, I just really loved all the survivor member of Stars stuff. I thought that was great. And the actual staging of the fight scene is very, very similar to Arnold's final fight with the Predator. Fight starts in Predator with Arnold swinging a branch at the Predator and it breaks on his arm, and Wesker blocks the lead pipe the same way. There's then a sequence where Predator just punches Arnold a lot, which is quite similar to Wesker doing it, and then obviously Chris drops all the girders on top of Wesker. Arnold drops the big log onto the Predator, and you get the same shot pretty much of Chris in the foreground and the girders moving behind him, and they do that in Predator as well. The log moves in the background, so it's staging of it is very similar. I almost wonder whether it is meant to be a very loose homage. Did everyone think when we saw Wesker again in a subsequent game he was going to be permanently burned? Because I did. I thought that was a big character moment.
Yeah, I thought he would be burned.
Yeah, because he looks at the camera, doesn't he, straight on, and he's like, and we know, of course, I suppose
because the exposition does imply he's afraid of fire.
And of course, 5 carries on with that, with the kind of the Ouroboros being, that kind of weak to fire type thing. Yeah, it's a shame actually, but they obviously had to keep his perfect face. They couldn't. Yeah.
But maybe the implication too that if he can heal from potential death, that obviously he's going to overcome being burnt on the face a little bit.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that does actually conclude our playthrough of Resident Evil Code Veronica. Chris makes it heroically back to the VTOL. He goes literally flying into action and lands on the front of the plane.
It seems quite jovial considering he just got slammed against the front of that.
Yeah.
It's a great shot though, isn't it?
It's a good shot. And then it's a bit cringe there, and Claire's like...
How did she go, Nick?
Yeah, we won't do that.
And the most ineffective nuclear explosion ever as Umbrella Corps.
I remember saying this at the time of the Umbrella Corps thing. I was like, that explosion, there's no way that thing is dead. And again, rewatching it, I'm like, clearly that's decimated.
Well, there we go. Look, 20 glorious years, and we end the bloody podcast speaking about Umbrella Corps. What's wrong with you people? On that bombshell, we would wish Code Veronica a very happy 20 glorious years being in everyone's lives. Who knows what the next 5 to 10 years holds for Code Veronica? Will we see a remake? Who knows? But I hope everyone has enjoyed our retrospective playthrough. It's probably gone on a tad longer than we anticipated. We thought after our lengthy Resident Evil 3 one it wasn't going to be quite as long because it's such a linear path, but as you can see there is so much to talk about. It's a long game, and there's lots of different elements, and the fantastical to the ridiculous to the sublime, and of course there's always lots of differing opinions, but we hope we've done it justice, and as we celebrate 20 years, dig out your old game and see how you get on. So on that note, we now turn our attentions to the brand new season of Neptune's Biohazard Quiz.
For the past 8 years and 5 seasons, we have brought you groundbreaking lore, in-depth analysis, game reviews, and high-quality content. We've also brought you untold controversies and countless tales of underhand tactics, all in aid of the quiz.
I'd just like to announce everybody that this is 0 points for me this week. Thank you. Goodbye.
So my nomination person said 7, but I didn't agree with 7. I said it was 7T, and then you said it was 7T.
I didn't want people to think I'm cheating by just saying the same number that someone else has said, so I just the next number that sounds similar to 17. I swear I did not cheat, yo!
Jesus Christ. What kind of fucking question is that?
Quite frankly, if we only got 1 point and that's the winning score, then we're not doing our jobs right, and we're all going to have to hand in our biohazard cards.
Welcome to Neptune's Biohazard Quiz. Batman. Stars Tyrants. George Trevor. Rombie the Wrecker. Mr. Spencer. Neptune Biohazard Quiz.
Welcome, one and all. The scores have been reset. The slate is clean, as they say. We all remember, Rob won the most number of quizzes last season, but the overall winner of Season 5 was George, your success last podcast. So,
have you noticed I go very silent when you say that? Obviously, out of embarrassment.
But all the scores have been reset. So everyone's got a chance to do well again. And because we are celebrating Code Veronica, this is a Code Veronica themed quiz. Let's play Season 6 of Neptune's Biohazard Quiz. So question number 1, who is the chief of the prison guard room? Okay, question number 2, what do you find under the plant pot in the Antarctic terminal?
I can even offer you up even more information, because I actually thought that you were going to ask a question about that. I won't ruin it, but that asked even more specific information about that. So I'll say that now, so I'm not accused of cheating. I can go further with that answer.
Good. Question number 3, which outpost and how far away were Steve and Claire aiming before Alexia recaptured them?
Is this a 2-pointer?
Half a point each. Question number 4, name the 3 locations in the game where you encounter the Black Widow B.O.Ws. Not talking about the giant one. And finally, question number 5, what is the ID number on the umbrella card you need in the palace?
That's mine and Sean's favourite question.
Fucking hell, after all this time, all those years, that was my trick card, that was.
Make sure you don't get it wrong.
Fucking hell, you imagine it.
So, they're the 5 questions. Join us after this when we'll run through those answers.
Remember.
There was science behind the classic games. Crap science, yes, but science. There was sense.
Why has this tyrant got a pair of underpants on?
Reality.
Nick writes the questions, but he doesn't know the answers.
That's true. Yeah, that's amazing.
Well, I mean, the whole game is just one big missed opportunity, isn't it?
Rebirth.
The official podcast view on its canon is it's not canon until it is or not.
The Resident Evil Podcast.
Brother! Brother! You must let the community know the truth. The game is canon.
B.O.W's in space!
And there's Nick trying to sell a fucking £100 DVD version of the original on eBay. How did that sell for you, Nick?
That did not sell.
What a surprise.
The controls were shit, there was no story, it just didn't appeal to me at all, and yeah, no, I don't even like talking about it.
Wasn't there a dinosaur tyrant in one of her books as well?
Inspired by Underworld. I can't remember. Probably not the best person to ask, but there we go.
So yeah, thank you, the novel guy.
Yeah, you are the best person to ask.
I'm not allowed to talk about car and motorcycle manufacturers on the podcast.
Yeah, not that story.
I've never ever played the Code Veronica battle game.
Have you?
Oh, wow.
Okay, that's a shocker, even for me.
These online friendships are paper thin.
To be fair, I did pick Sonny because he said don't put me on, and now he's saying don't put me on. I can't be that surprised.
So if you see an image of the wolf pack being stood behind Jill, and it doesn't now validate Operation Raccoon City because it's a fucking collectible card game.
Oh, I even find the idea that you can walk into a room and you can hear the breathing. It's like the... Yeah. And I was like, oh shit.
Oh my fucking days, have I got to do this again?
The so-called tank controls were very tanky.
I think if anybody looks at 7 and says it's not Resident Evil enough, needs to seriously sit down and rewatch Vendetta.
Yes.
And just ask yourself that question again. Is it Resident Evil enough?
What have we done to upset Capcom that much?
We made this podcast.
Let's start back with question number 1. Welcome back. So who is the chief of the prison guard? I've actually had some comments that George should be asked all the questions first.
Am I allowed to ask who put the suggestion in?
No, that's confidential. So, George, what's your answer?
Sorry, I'm just trying to think who hates me the most. It's a long list. I can't think. Obviously, I know Bob was one of the detainees, but I presume his name's in a file and I don't know.
Okay. Star's turn?
I'm not too sure on this one, because I seem to recall the file only... you can only think of the name Bob from the file, like George... Is it Rodrigo? Is he not the chief of the prison guard?
Okay. Rombie?
I was going to say Rodrigo, because I can't think of anyone else.
Okay. Batman?
I think it's a gentleman called Paul Steiner.
What?
In the file, it's talking about the metal compounds at the start of the game. He needs security clearance to get in, and I'm pretty sure he's mentioned there as the...
Do you know what fucks me off is I remembered the names. I memorised them while I was playing it, of the two fucking Carls, and it hasn't come up. Carl Grisham and Carl Redhill. Where were those questions, Nick?
I don't know. I'm going to pick all your questions. Would it surprise you to let you know that that's a point to Batman? It is Paul Steiner.
Well done.
Well done.
Question number 2. What do you find under the plant pot in the Antarctic terminal? George?
It's a key, and it's made by a firm called Radical.
Right, what key is it?
Oh, shit. Shit! Oh, it's the mining room key.
Batman?
I just had key. I mean, I initially wrote down backtracking for all the answers for all 5 questions, but...
Except for the first one, obviously.
Honestly, I just had key. I can't remember which key it is. I thought it might be the crane key.
Okay, crane key. Interesting. Rombie?
Machine room key.
Machine room key. And Star's Tyrant?
Machine room key.
Oh, no.
It is the machine room key.
Oh, come on. Did I get half a point for Radical? No. You just said what I
tell you what, my heart sunk for George there, because I don't doubt he's wrong, but that was just like so much detail that was so unnecessary for the question.
Question number 3. Which outpost and how far away was Steve and Claire aiming before Alexia recaptured them? George?
I don't know. This is in Steve's dialogue cutscene.
Right.
I've got no idea. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, Rombie?
It's an Australian base. G'day, mate. And it's 7 miles away.
Okay, Batman?
Outpost 31. No, it's not. It's Australian base, 7 miles away.
Okay, Star's turn.
This is an Australian observation base about 7 miles away.
Correct, it is an Australian outpost, and it is 7 miles away, so points there to everyone bar George. Question number 4. Name the 3 locations in the game you encounter the Black Widow B.O.Ws. George?
This is bullying. I don't know the 3. I'm not going to... I can think of 2 of them, but
then that's fine. Well, that's fine, because if we get 2 out of 3, then maybe half a point up.
I'm really bad at describing the areas that you're in. You're just outside the save room, you know, where you get the battery pack.
Right, yeah.
And then I know there's some in the sewers, almost that resemble when you go down in the sewers in Resident Evil 2, but I can't think where that area... Wait, where is that area? I can't think. It's much later on, so I can't think. I mean, you get the little ones after that battle. It's the Black Widow. So I'll say that as the 3rd area.
Okay, Batman?
The corridor outside the save room with Chris, outside the hangar where the planes are. There is some in the corridors underground where you go to fight the Albinoid, and there is some in the B.O.W storage room in the Antarctic base.
Okay, Star's turn.
I got bow room where you get the barcode sticker, the Harrier hallway I called it, and the Albinoid corridor, which is like the where you go down the ladder after the diorama of the facility.
Rombie?
Yeah, I've got the same 3 in the weapons room where they were housed, where the sticker is, the hall outside the volcano room, or the save room where you get the battery, and the hallway between the diorama and the Albinoid's lair.
Absolutely, you're spot on there. George, I can't quite give you, because there isn't little ones in the...
No, it's for the fact that I didn't even get the ones in the B.O.W.
Yeah, you got half. You got half, because you said the underground pack, where you meant the sewers.
I'm giving you the Albinoids.
Yeah, I'm giving you that, so you get half.
But I'm embarrassed I didn't get the B.O.W. room, which is where you first encountered them. That's terrible.
Yeah, there we go. And finally, question number 5. What is the ID number on the umbrella card you need in the palace? George?
NTC 0394.
Star's turn.
NTC 0394.
Batman?
Yeah, I had NTSC 0394, which I know is the American thing. I know it's wrong, I just knew it was something similar to that.
Rombie?
NTC 039.
There we go. Correct, the answer is NTC 0394, so all points there for everyone except Batman, who put an NTSC there. So let's have a look at those final scores, and true to form, we have joint winners of this podcast, celebrating a rare victory. Stars Tyrant with 4.
Thank you.
Sharing that with Rombie, who started the way he means to go on with 4 points. In second place is Batman with 3 points and George with 1.5 points. So that does conclude the quiz. Join us for the next podcast when we'll have some more questions. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our Happy Birthday Code Veronica podcast. We hope you've all enjoyed it. Next up, well, we're going to be doing our final preview of Resident Evil 3 Remake. As we said in the news, we've just had the trailer, so we're going to be having a final in-depth discussion on what we want to see, what we don't want to see, where do we want the remake to take us, that kind of thing, just as a kind of big final preview just before the game drops. So we've got that to look forward to, and obviously by the time this comes out as well, we'll be very tantalisingly close to our release of ResidentEvilPodcast.com, so get excited for that. But on that note, it is goodbye from me, Neptune.
Goodbye from me, Batman.
Goodbye from me, Stars Tyrant.
Goodbye from me, George Trevor.
And goodbye from me, Rombie. I'm going to have to ask one last thing. John, did you try the battle game?
I didn't.
Oh.